What's up guys, this is your favorite fanfic YouTuber, the Fanfic Majesty. Join my Discord if you want to chat and share your thoughts, the link is in the description. 6WP Chapter 141 2 Prophecies. Soul Eater. Hearing what Yan Li said, Lin nodded unsurprisingly and said softly. No problem, just say it. 99 At the same time, Xu Wenwu slowly got up and said. I'm going to see the kids. After waiting for Xu Wenwu to leave, Yingli said with a sigh. Mr. Lin, I don't really like fighting and killing things. After hearing this, Lin smiled and nodded. I understand your thinking very well. But have you ever thought about it? Like your original seclusion in the mountains or in the world, it can't solve any problems at all. It's even possible to suffer a life crisis like this time. Have you ever thought that this time you are just sacrificing yourself to save your child's life? It is estimated that the other party is kind. Speaking of this, Lin's tone became a little indifferent. Meet someone with a ruthless heart. I can guarantee that not only you, but your children will die miserably. Even, your corpse will become a trap, and it is very likely that your husband will also die because of your thoughts. Hearing this, Ying Li, who had died once, couldn't refute, but she still said stubbornly, as if O2 Buddha was explaining something. This time we were careless. Hearing what Ying Li said, Lin briefly thought about it, nodded and said softly. If you say that, there's not much of a problem, but the real problem, I don't think you found it. From what you just said, I can clearly perceive that your perspective is too idealistic. Having said this, Lin paused for a while, and his tone was a little sigh. I believe that Xu Wenwu must love you very, very much. Because I simply can't understand why he is willing to give up the 10 rings and make such a choice. I live in seclusion in the world with you and be an ordinary couple. I feel like this may be true love. 5. Crazy for love, crazy for love. Even. Speaking of at the moment, Lin's tone was cold. For love, willing to die. When Yingli heard this, her eyes were filled with astonishment. Advertisement, what? Hearing the surprise in Yingli's tone, Lin explained. Wei Xingyao, there are some people who understand prophecy. The fact that we can find Xu Wenwu this time has a lot to do with the picture we predicted. 55. There are 2 pictures with Xu Wenwu's prediction. The first rule is that Xu Wenwu cooperates with the Hand Association to attack our Xingyao. As for the purpose, having said that, Lin Lian said with some playfulness. To resurrect you, unfortunately, even with my current strength, he can't defeat him at all, so he will definitely be defeated in the end. 35. Cannot be resurrected. That's why I came to Xu Wenwu in advance, just to nip the danger in the bud. As for the second picture, it has to do with the tarot. 35. Speaking of this, Lin's tone was inexplicably emotional. According to the prophecy information I got, Xu Wenwu may be missing you, he's going crazy. Being seduced by the monsters hidden in the depths of your tarot. 99. The goal is the same, to resurrect you. I believe that he knows that this is likely to be a trap, and stepping into it is very likely to die without a burial. But, he stepped in resolutely. 39. As for the result. Lin shook his head slightly, with a complicated expression and some sighs, and continued. I was sucked into the soul and died, it can be said that it was wiped out, and there is no possibility of resurrection. 35. Hearing what Lin said, Yingli opened her mouth slightly, with a look of fear in her eyes, and her eyes were complicated. This is. Before Yingli could finish speaking, Lin continued to speak, looking at the gorgeous eyes with a doubtful tone. I have a question. If it were me, I would not have made such a choice at all. Why does Xu Wenwu have to take off the 10 rings to be with you? Hearing Lin's question, Yingli seemed to explain. In order not to expand the 10 rings, and not to hurt other people, right? Before Yingli finished speaking, Lin added directly. Advertisement. Hearing what Lin said, Yingli nodded. Seeing this, Lin continued. But have you ever thought that people don't hurt tigers, but tigers hurt people's hearts? I know that in your mind, you feel that letting go of the 10 rings is equivalent to washing your hands in a golden basin. From then on, all the grievances in the rivers and lakes have nothing to do with him. It's a nice idea, but what's the reality, you see? Whether it is an individual, a party, or even a country or a nation. Peace, friendliness, ease, and basking in your own little days are good. But to survive in this world, everyone must first use all available conditions to create the power to protect themselves, right? Yingli nodded and said, I know what you mean, but... No but. Lin interrupted directly. But, it proves that you don't understand what I said. Let's not talk about how many enemies Xu Wenwu has made before. Even if someone knows that he has 10 rings in his hand, sooner or later the enemy will come to him. Just like me. After speaking, Lin pointed to himself and said without shyness. 897. Thinking about a peaceful life is not a problem, much less a mistake. Xu Wenwu can do it if he takes off the 10th ring, but he can do better with it. 35. The most important thing is that there is a problem with your thinking. 35. Speaking of which, Lin pointed to his own brain. You walk into a mental trap. A lot of times, it's not that you don't want to get in trouble, and trouble won't find you. 35. All your ideas, all your needs must be based on being able to drive away all spoilers. Otherwise, this is not only irresponsible to yourself, but to your family, to your lover. Your son and daughter are still young, can you imagine how they will grow up without a mother's love for many years? Hearing this, Yingli pondered for a long time, and finally bowed her head slightly and said, "It was my fault, I did it wrong." Hearing the apology in Yingli's mouth, Lin said with a faint smile on her face, "Don't worry, you are alive now," and Xu Wenwu also joined Xingyao. "We, Xingyao, will protect everyone's family and will not let them be easily harmed." But, at the moment, Lin's tone paused, in a consultative tone, but mixed with affirmation. "I want to talk to you about something, it's about Taro, Chapter 142 The Future Base Camp of Xingyao. When it comes to Taro, Lin's eyes are dark, although his tone is negotiable. After hearing this, Yingli suddenly raised her head and asked suspiciously, "I was just about to ask, 35, how do you know about Taro?" However, although Yingli was surprised, she did not appear very excited. It may be because of the initial trust in Lin, the true savior. Hearing the tone in Yingli's mouth, Lin said softly with a smile, "On the one hand, I naturally have my news channels. On the other hand, according to the information obtained from prophecy, the monsters sealed in your tarot will break through and cause chaos. In the original future, your husband died because of this. So, I did some research. Well, this is true, but I didn't say what the final result was." Immediately afterwards, Lin looked at Yingli's eyes, which flashed in disbelief, and said lightly, "The screen reappears." The moment the words fell, accompanied by a strange wave, the entire study suddenly changed. In an instant, Yingli found herself at the edge of a cliff in the depths of Taro. The sky was very dark, and a large number of bat-like monsters rushed into the distance. And in the air above his head, his husband Xu Wenwu was caught by a huge amount of monster that resembled a bat. The head was close to Xu Wenwu's brain, biting constantly. At the same time, above Xu Wenwu's body, a transparent figure faintly revealed, which was the soul of his husband. The whole process, as if this monster was devouring the soul of his husband. At the moment, Lin, who was standing next to Yingli, pointed to the monster above and explained it. "Yingli, this is the prophecy picture I saw before. Well, it is indeed something that will happen in the future, but it is just a plot that I saw in my previous life. I checked the relevant information about this monster, it is called Soul Eater, 99. I live by devouring souls in my life, and ordinary swords and guns cannot harm it at all. In the future, it will cause huge amounts of harm to the Taro, and even have a serious impact on the entire world. You can imagine the huge disaster caused by a large number of soul-devouring soul eaters, which will devour souls on the earth. I believe you, Taro, you should know the danger of this thing. I tell you." Having said that, Lin paused and said heavily, "According to our Xingyao prophecy, huge amounts of changes will occur on the entire earth in the future. There will never be fewer disasters like this. We, Xingyao, dare not say that we will be able to survive in such a chaotic world. Advertisement, so, we must have a stable base. And you, Taro, although there are huge amounts of hidden dangers inside, 39. But as long as it is cleaned up, I believe, it will be the foundation for our Xingyao to stand in the future, 35. Hearing this, Yingli's palm on her knee was inexplicably tight, and then her smile became a little dry, and her tone also fluctuated. "What exactly do you want to do?" Hearing the nervousness in Yingli's tone, Lin said without realizing it. "Mrs. Xu, if you don't take me, I can find it myself. The reason why I am willing to communicate with you is that I am afraid that without a mutual acquaintance to mediate, I am afraid that it will be difficult for those who do not welcome outsiders to complete a friendly meeting with me, 39. Hearing what Lin said, Yingli stared at Lin and said, "Mr. Lin, I am so grateful that you have brought me back to life and given me the opportunity to live with my children, with Wenwu. But, if you want to use this to blackmail me against my village, I'm so sorry, I can't agree." Looking at the eyes in Yingli, Lin said directly, "I didn't say I was going to deal with them, I just want the secret realm of space where Taro exists. Yes, I want this place." Hearing what Lin said, Yingli hurriedly stood up. You can't do that. You're a robbery." 35 Outside the door, Xu Wenwu heard the voice inside, and there was no panic in his eyes, as if he knew what was going on inside. Lin heard Yingli's irritable tone and spoke calmly. "All right, Mrs. Xu. Don't play anymore. I don't believe Xu Wenwu hasn't talked to you about my interest in Taro. To put it bluntly, I will save you this time, 99. On the one hand, it is indeed for Xu Wenwu. He's a talent, and I appreciate talent. On the other hand, for the Taro, 35, this time, I have already got Xu Wenwu, and I will never give up on Taro. Is there a problem?" When Yingli heard Lin's frank words, she did not continue to be shocked. Instead, the anger on his face began to disappear quickly, replaced by a wry smile. "Mr. Lin, you are indeed very smart. Thank you, Mrs. Xu, for your appreciation. I agree with this very much. Advertisement, and very strong. Well, as a leader of a party, being strong is a must-have quality." Hearing what Lin said, there was a hint of helplessness in his eyes. He took a deep breath, sat down again, and said in a difficult tone, "Can I discuss a few things with you?" "No problem, that's my main goal. I personally advocate peace, but not the use of violence." Afterwards, the two talked in the study for about half an hour. After communicating all the details, Lin took a sip of water, clapped her hands, stood up, and said to Yingli. Mrs. Shu, I understand your feelings for your hometown very well, 39. Your request is very reasonable, and for your husband's sake, there is no need for me to refuse. So, thank you for your cooperation, today's meeting is very pleasant. But, 5. I have one last word to say. When faced with an unprecedented disaster, survival is the most important thing. When the words fell, he immediately turned and left the study, pushed open the door, and saw Xu Wenwu standing outside, showing a shallow smile. After getting close, he handed out a mobile phone and an iron plate and said gently. Everything went smoothly. You rest first. Have a good time with your wife and kids. Come back to me in a week. Qian Nujiao, the artificial intelligence in the mobile phone will explain all your doubts, and this iron card can quickly open the space channel. In the back, we will have a safe base where your children and your wife can live. Although it is not as quiet here, safety is absolutely guaranteed. After Xu Wenwu heard it, he nodded and said, yes, I will. After his wife's death, he is more vigilant about safety. Don't worry, what Xingyao will give you in the future will definitely exceed your imagination. 99. Your wife, your children, will benefit. I'm leaving, see you next week. I send you. No, for me, distance has never been a problem. After Lin declined, he waved to Frank who was not far away. Space teleportation. 99 in an instant, a sparking portal appeared, and under everyone's gaze, Lin took Frank one step out. In a blink of an eye, we arrived in Los Angeles. Chapter 143 Mission System, Reward System. A week later, Los Angeles, Blackstone Security, Underground Training Ground. Lin stood in the middle of the training ground, looking at the portal that appeared not far away. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised. After the portal opened, it was Xu Wenwu. In the past few days, although Xu Wenwu tried to carry out space teleportation through the space teleportation magical tool given by the company. But this time, suddenly crossing half the Earth, still made him feel very surprised. However, the experience of hundreds of years has made him very calm. Looking at Lin not far away, his future boss, striding forward. Walking to Lin, he bowed slightly and said loudly. Boss, here I come, Yingli asked me to say hello to you. Hearing what Xu Wenwu said, a faint smile appeared on Lin's face, and when he reached out, 2 jade pendants appeared. Handed to Xu Wenwu and said softly at the same time. Welcome to Xingyao. Say hello to Yingli for me too. These 2 jade pendants are my gifts to your children and daughters. When encountering a fatal crisis, it can automatically defend itself and protect itself. Defense is not bad. 39 Xu Wenwu hesitated for a moment, then put it away and said gratefully. Thank you boss. Is there anything I need to do right now? Hearing Xu Wenwu's question, Lin nodded with satisfaction. He has always been very optimistic about 900U's hardworking talents. So he spoke. Your combat power is also considered top-notch in our Xingyao group. In addition, the 10 Rings gang you created before is very influential in the Dark World. 35. So, my current plan is that you continue to do this aspect and be responsible for managing the enemies of the dark side of Xingyao group. For example, like some hands, or other evil supernatural forces. With your strength, I believe there should be no problem. 35. On Frank's side, the focus is on positive operations, such as security. 95. Advertisement. Hearing this, Xu Wenwu nodded and said very confidently. Okay, no problem, I can arrange someone to do it here. After hearing this, Lin Ren nodded and continued. Also, you need to integrate the people of your 10 Rings state into Xingyao's mission system. We Xingyao have a complete supply chain of extraordinary items and a power system. This point must be properly arranged. Fight for it to be fully integrated, to fully exploit the strengths between the two of us, ACFI. Having said this, Lin paused for a while and his tone changed, as if to imply something. It is expected that in 3 or 4 months, the entire Earth will usher in a big battle, waiting for us to shine. So, recently, don't forget to improve your strength. You also urge the people of the 10 Rings gang to complete tasks, exchange abilities, and improve large-scale team combat abilities. Otherwise, 39, the future is hard to say. Hearing this, Xu Wenwu seemed to understand something and nodded heavily. When Lin saw it, he nodded slightly, and then called Frank next to him, asking him to introduce Xingyao's quest system and reward system to Xu Wenwu. The quest system and reward system of Xingyao were created by Lin. As long as you complete the task, you can get the corresponding reward. Originally it was just some hot weapons or dollars. However, as Lin's strength continues to grow, his words and expressions continue to improve. Gradually increased exchange options such as abilities, physical fitness enhancements, and even arcane weapons. Greatly stimulated the combat team members of Blackstone Security. You know, Lin's words are a panacea, and any form of energy can be realized. In addition, since he came into contact with the casting of arcane weapons, he was able to quickly and mass produce extraordinary items. Greatly enriched the reward system, and the reason why Lin let Xu Wenwu guide the people of the 10 Rings gang into Xingyao's system. On the one hand, it is indeed to quickly improve their strength and prepare for the subsequent battle. On the other hand, as long as they are integrated into Xingyao's mission system and reward system, enjoying the supply of extraordinary energy and a large number of resources, at that time, there is absolutely no idea of leaving. After all, advertisement staying in Xingyao, as long as you get enough rewards, extend your lifespan, and become an extraordinary powerhouse is not a dream. To put it in a bad way, even if Xu Wenwu had other ideas later, most of the members of the Ten Rings gang who had integrated into the Xingyao system would no longer follow Xu Wenwu. This is also a method of annexation chosen by Lin, which is more subtle, but also very effective. Xu Wenwu naturally knew the intention of Lin's instructions, but he didn't care too much. After all, he has no other ideas now. On the contrary, he is very interested in Xingyao's quest and reward system and various extraordinary items. These, for his family, are very helpful. Whether it is safety, strength, or even life expectancy, it can be effectively satisfied. This made Xu Wenwu feel quite satisfied. You must know that although you have lived for hundreds of years, many loyal subordinates and friends are basically dying of old age and can only be cultivated from generation to generation. In terms of transcendent ability, there are really not many places he can start with. This time, I saw hope from Xingyao, and naturally I won't miss it. Lin saw Frank, who was talking to Xu Wenwu, nodded slightly, and said lightly. Space teleportation. In an instant, a portal appeared in front of him, and then he stepped in and returned to his own office in Los Angeles. Now, he has to go back to continue reading. This is his learning task. At the same time, it is also a way to improve strength. Lin is now more and more certain that high-level words and deeds must have very high requirements for knowledge. It's like comparing a blacksmith to Iron Man Tony. With the knowledge in his brain, Tony can make a steel armor even if it is iron. Sir, Your Excellency Xu Wenwu has obtained all the information of the Han Hui. This made him extremely satisfied, and a pure iron blacksmith can produce at most one iron armor. A week later, Xingyao Building, the chairman's office. Excuse me, do you want to send people to completely destroy the Han Association? Every time he learns new knowledge, he can clearly perceive that he has made a little progress in his mastery of how to speak. Lin, who was reading a book, suddenly heard a soft voice in her ear. So he's been learning, constantly filling in his shortcomings. And if he wants to use words more freely, knowledge is indispensable. Chapter 144 Xu Wenwu's Test, Problem. I heard Vera's message about the hand. Lin nodded in satisfaction. Sure enough, pulling Xu Wenwu and the Ten Rings gang into Xingyao was the right choice. Originally, Xingyao's intelligence system was relatively simple. It mainly relies on Vera to obtain a large amount of information from the internet for comparison and integration. Although there is a lot of information that can be obtained, a lot of it is still relatively superficial. Even if he could hack into SHIELD and even the military's intelligence network. But the really valuable information is often paper records or in the local area network, cannot be obtained through the network at all. And with the addition of the Ten Rings gang, the original information system of the Ten Rings gang was integrated into Xingyao. You know, the Ten Rings gang was built by Xu Wenwu over hundreds of years. Although there is very little about the superhuman combat power, his intelligence system is quite perfect. It has only been a week, and all the locations of the Han Union have been investigated by the Ten Ring gang. This makes Lin quite satisfied. For this hand and meeting, Lin dismissed their strength. 18. He is extremely vigilant about the dimension behind the Han Union, Mephisto Black Sky. He didn't forget that in the prophecy picture, in addition to Xu Wenwu being possessed by the power of the Black Sky, a large number of ninjas also exude the aura of the power of the Black Sky. You know, with the power of the Black Sky possessed by Xu Xuanwu, he can fight with him 1 or 2 times. For those ninjas, although their original strength is not strong, they can definitely increase their strength by a large amount of possessions such as black bows. If they secretly attacked Xingyao, Lin couldn't tell, it would be really troublesome. The first strike is strong, and the second strike suffers. Directly slaughter the hands in the meeting in advance. This time, not only the 5 fingers were killed, but even the ninjas trained by the Shuhei Club were able to kill them cleanly. All traces of it were not removed. Even if the 5 fingers of the Han Hui Association were resurrected through other strange channels this time, they would never give them the possibility of committing crimes again. With that in mind, he instructed Vera. Start the task of exterminating the hand in the meeting. 99. Remember to let Xu Wenwu also participate, as a good start. Advertisement. After Vera heard it, she quickly replied softly. Okay, sir, it has been posted to Xingyao's mission system, and at the same time, Mr. Xu Wenwu said that there is no problem. You can fight anytime. Hearing this, Lin nodded very satisfied. At the same time, Xu Wenwu, who was in Blackstone Security, found Frank. Seeing the book Frank was reading, a faint smile floated on his face, and he said jokingly. Frank, do you need me to introduce some famous teachers? I know a gold medal lecturer from the East who is quite experienced in management. After Frank heard it, he raised his head, glanced at Xu Wenwu who was smiling, and said with a smile. Okay, boss asked me to learn more. I also invited some so-called famous teachers recently, but I found that some were not suitable. After all. Speaking of which, Frank blinked, as if implying something, and said softly. Our business is special. Hearing what Frank said, Xu Wenwu also smiled. After laughing for a while, he turned his face straight and said to Frank in a deep voice. Frank, I won't go into detail this time. I have something I hope you can help me with. Hearing this, Frank's face turned straight and he listened carefully. Seeing this, Xu Wenwu continued. The boss has given a mission, which is to exterminate the Hand Hekai. I want to send people from the Ten Rings gang and your Special Forces team at the same time. Take this opportunity to get in touch with each other. 99. But, having said that, Xu Wenwu paused for a while and then spoke slowly. There is a difference between the people of the Stone Ring gang and the people of the Special Forces team. I saw that basically all the members of the Special Forces team have undergone physical strengthening, and even the outstanding ones have opened their own extraordinary ability. And the people from the Ten Rings gang have just joined. Although they have rich combat experience in the past, their physical fitness must reach the peak level of normal people at most, and there are not many. So, I want to apply for the award in advance. Strengthening physical fitness for some people, and at the same time, for those who have rich combat experience and whose physical fitness has reached the peak level of human beings, open extraordinary ability. Advertisement 0 katakana middle dot ask for flowers. I hope you can apply with me. Hearing this, Frank fell into deep thought. He knew the difference between the Ten Rings gang and the BlackRock security squad. After all, he has only been training the team for a few years, and the people of the Ten Rings gang have existed for hundreds of years. There is definitely a huge difference between the two. The advantage of the members of the Special Operations team is that they joined Xingyao early and got strengthening in all aspects. Basically, all the team leaders have enabled abilities, and even the outstanding ones have enabled abilities. If you only rely on personal strength, it is much higher than most of the Ten Ring gang. Therefore, in the recent period, the scene has been suppressed. 0.00 However, if they are allowed to start physical strengthening in advance, they can even be given extraordinary ability. There is likely to be a huddle problem. This, he had to prevent. Thinking of this, Frank raised his head and glanced at Xu Wenwu on the opposite side, looked at the other side with a smile, and murmured for a while. It is impossible for Xu Wenwu not to know this. Even if the other party goes directly to the boss to chat, it is very likely that the boss will agree directly. After all, his boss' strength is enough to suppress everyone, so he won't worry about it. And the reason why Xu Wenwu told himself, it is very likely that he also hinted at the problem of holding a group. On the other hand, they are also testing their ability to solve problems. After all, this problem exists and is inevitable. In other words, this is the pain that Xingyao's growth cannot avoid. And he, as a high-level executive who can be compared with Xu Wenwu in terms of the Shining Star Group's force, must solve this problem. Or, after the solution is completed, Xu Wenwu's approval can be obtained. After all, he survived hundreds of monsters, and his strength was so powerful that he couldn't beat him before. If it weren't for the boss, he would directly suppress it with strength far beyond his, and take out what the other party needs most. I'm afraid it won't be so happy to join Xingyao. Therefore, this problem must be solved, and Xu Wenwu cannot be underestimated. Thinking of this, Frank thought for a moment and said directly. I think that. Chapter 145 Kamar Taj's teleportation system. I think this proposal works. Regarding Xu Wenwu's tentative words, Frank smiled slightly and continued. There can't be too much of this kind of behavior. Xu, that's it. You can make a list, and the two of us will screen it carefully. Write a detailed application report. Give the boss some advice, whoever strengthens his physical fitness, whoever activates his abilities. After Xu Wenwu heard it, he pondered for a while, nodded slightly, and agreed very readily. Okay, no problem, I'm here to make a list. When the time comes, the two of us will review it together. Well, he understood exactly what Frank meant. This also shows that the opponent's management ability is indeed not weak. In doing so, on the one hand, the final power can be handed over to Lin, which makes the Ten Ring gang more convinced of Lin. On the other hand, Frank, 900, rank conducts the audit with himself. Doing so is equivalent to using his prestige to establish the impression that the two are of equal status in front of the Ten Rings gang. At the same time, who will improve the quality and who will activate the ability is closely related to the opinions of the two. Therefore, he had to be nice to Frank. Once you show goodwill, it is clear at a glance who can win over and who is more stubborn. Later, the problem of holding groups can be solved in a targeted manner. Moreover, all the behaviors are very reasonable and no one can fault it. After all, it's for everyone's benefit. Therefore, Frank's books are not too few to read, the strength is not weak, and the management ability is not bad. Not a fool. Xu Wenwu sighed secretly, then shook the phone and said with a smile. Wait a minute, I will send you the contact information of that famous teacher through my mobile phone. At that time, you can make contact appointments according to your own time. In this case, I won't bother you for now, I'll make the list first. After Frank heard it, he also smiled and thanked him, and then watched the figure of the other party leaving. Xu Wenwu's offer, he naturally wants to follow, after all, he will be a colleague in the future. The years to come together are still long, he is no longer just a fighter now, but a helmsman. At this moment, Lin had no idea about Xu Wenwu's trial and Frank's response. Or, even if he knew, he didn't care, because, advertisement. This is a world with extraordinary abilities. he is so powerful that he can really do whatever he wants. Unless, you make the world angry and make the whole world hostile. Otherwise, the weak worship or fear the strong, which is the essence. Relying on his strength, it is not difficult at all to recreate a Xingyao. But now, he didn't pay any attention to the previous hand and meeting at all. After all, just one Xu Wenwu was enough to wipe out the hands in the meeting. Not to mention, there are many experienced warriors and subordinates with extraordinary ability. For the hands and the enemies like this, sprinkle water. Now, he has set his sights on Taro. More precisely, it is positioning of the future Taro. Since the beginning of planning for Taro, he has decided that the future headquarters of Xingyao must be placed on Taro. Because Taro is not a simple place, but a secret space. He can be said to be both on Earth and not on Earth. To be precise, it is attached to the space where the Earth is. Therefore, through the Taro, the consumption that comes to various locations on the Earth will be greatly reduced. More importantly, ordinary people do not have the space ability and cannot reach the Taro at all. Therefore, Taro is definitely the best choice for headquarters. The problem now is that Lin needs a complete delivery system. It can run spontaneously and provide everyone in Xingyao with free access to the headquarters. Otherwise, you have to instill energy, and you can enter through the door. It's better to be closer, but once the distance is extended, the energy consumed is likely to be massive. The threshold is too high, not conducive to long-term development. And Lin's goal is to build a delivery system for the 3 holy places in Kamar Taj. He has tried New York Holy Place before to London and Hong Kong Holy Place. It's very simple, you can directly cross a door and go in, you can travel half the world. What's more, there is no consumption at all, it really seems like a step forward. If in the future, all branches on Earth can reach Taro's headquarters so easily. Definitely a very good choice. It is very beneficial for Xingyao to control all distributed forces, and it is extremely beneficial to combat. Because advertisement with just a single step, a large number of combatants can be rapidly deployed. Who is not worried, who is not afraid? This is undoubtedly a force that can be used as a shock to the world. In addition, Lin can set up a large-scale array in Taro headquarters. Even if someone attacks, with the power of the formation, all enemies are suppressed. Thinking of this, Lin felt a little excited inside. Then get ready. Gift to Ancient One Magician. Well, the transmission system of the entire holy place, even the method, is very precious to Kamar Taj. So, you must pay a lot of money to get it, and the premise of everything is Ancient One Magician will speak, otherwise, everything is in vain. And the Ancient One Magician's kindness towards himself, Lin can clearly feel it. Otherwise, he wasn't ready to get a delivery system through Kamar Taj's channel. However, how much to pay this time requires a lot of thought. Or, what gift could make the Ancient One Magician happy? After thinking for a moment, the corners of Lin's mouth twitched slightly. In an instant, a portal with sparks appeared in front of him. Seeing the picture of Kamar Taj opposite, Lin stepped out. After entering, he looked around for a week and saw Mordo Magician training magician apprentices with a faint smile on his face. After waiting for a while, Mordo Magician came to Lin after finishing his work, and said with some doubts. Lin, are you doing anything other than borrowing books this time? Well, basically every morning Lin goes back to Kamar Taj to borrow books and return them. So reading Magician 5.8 silently is more familiar to him. It was only before that, when I saw it, I said hello to Roar, just go directly to the library. And this time, I have been waiting for myself, indicating that there must be other things, specifically that I have something to look for myself. Lin felt the doubtful tone in Mordo Magician's mouth and smiled lightly. Mordo, I need to discuss something with Sorcerer Supreme. So, please let me know. Hearing Lin's reply, Mordo Magician showed a sure color. As a result, Mordo Magician closed his eyes slightly, kept clasping his hands, blue light appeared, and then floated in the air, as if he was contacting someone. Seeing this, Lin looked at it and waited silently beside her. Well, if you have something to discuss with the Ancient One Magician, you must be more formal. Soon, Mordo Magician opened his eyes and said lightly to Lin. Lin, Sorcerer Supreme said he could go to the tea room to discuss. Chapter 146 Refreshing, Blood, Energy. The corner of Lin's mouth twitched slightly when he heard the Ancient One Magician agreed to meet him. Soon, he followed Mordo Magician into the tea room. Looking at the Ancient One Magician who was pouring tea, a faint smile appeared on Lin's face. It seems that this time the results should not be too bad. Otherwise, just because the Ancient One Magician can see the future, can directly reject himself, instead of having such a good attitude. Only, there was a flash of pain in Lin's eyes. This time, the price will probably not be less. Immediately afterwards, Mordo Magician brought Ling into the tea room, bowed slightly, and then exited. When Lin saw this, he bowed slightly, and when he saw the Ancient One Magician stretched out his hand, he sat on the futon. Wei Wei took a sip of the tea in the cup, put it down, and said softly to the Ancient One Magician in front of him. Sorcerer Supreme, there is one thing I would like to ask. Immediately afterwards, Lin looked at the Ancient One Magician and nodded slightly and continued. Recently, I plan to build a teleportation system exclusively for Xingyao. In order to cope with the many changes in the future. But point 35, I have not done in-depth research in this area. 39. So, I hope to get your guidance. Immediately afterwards, he stretched out his hand and waved, and 3 different colored energies emerged, namely indigo blue, red and purple gold. The 3 exuded not weak energy fluctuations. Then, Lin said loudly, Sorcerer Supreme, as the price of your guidance. This is the result of my latest research. This indigo blue energy, which I call the energy source, can quickly replenish any form of energy, including the magic of the magician. Such a serving is enough to replenish 10 average magician energy. And Zhenfei is red energy, which I call the power of qi and blood, and its function is to rapidly strengthen physical fitness. 55. It only takes 1/10 of it to break through the peak level of the human body, and if you consume a whole serving, it is enough to improve the physical fitness of the human body by 6 to 10 times. And the dark purple energy, which I call the power of rejuvenation, can quickly recover and strengthen people's spirits. Advertisement, it's going to be very different depending on the mental level of people. And in the 3 energies, I'm giving away 1,000 copies each, hoping to get guidance from you, Sorcerer Supreme, and Kamar Taj. Lin looked at these 3 energies, and there was a flash of pain in his eyes, not to mention how much it cost to create these 3 energies. At the current level, to condense a source of energy, it would need to consume 1 million wealth points, a power of qi and blood would consume 2 million wealth points, and the power of rejuvenation would consume the most terrifying power. 1 copy would consume a full 5 million wealth points. This gift alone would cost 8 billion worth of wealth. Converted into real assets, equivalent to 80 billion yuan. It is equivalent to being promoted to rank 5, which is nearly 1/10 of the consumption. If it wasn't for the recent annexation of the 10 Rings gang and the acquisition of hundreds of billions of assets, Lin would not have given such a huge gift. Although the price paid is high, but with only the Kamar Taj teleportation system available, the price is worth it. As for what to say about getting it for free, Lin didn't think much about it and didn't dare to think so. Looking good for free. But in fact, most of the time, it is a poison wrapped in sugar and it is difficult to spit it out after eating it. This is the principle that Lin believes in. At the same time, sending these gifts also means making a good relationship with the Ancient One magician. As a well-known powerhouse in the universe, such a gift is worthy. Otherwise, send a 10,000 yuan mobile phone or gift to a strong man like Ancient One magician to exchange their years of experience in building a teleportation system. Is this forcing the other party to turn his face? Sincerity is still required, and this matter is very important for the future development of Xingyao. It's all worth it. The Ancient One magician at this moment looked at the 3 energies in front of him with interest. Feeling that these 3 energies are of great benefit to Kamar Taj's magician, a gentle smile appeared on his face, and he spoke slowly. Thank you Lin for your kindness. You can learn from Kamar Taj's teleportation system. But, speaking of which, Ancient One magician paused, looked at Lin opposite, and said in a leisurely tone. You need to be clear about one thing. Advertisement. You know the magicians of our Kamar Taj, who are best at using the dimension Beelzebub's power. 99. So, our teleportation system is also closely related to the power of dimensions. Each transmission, although it seems to be no consumption, actually consumes the dimensional power all over the Earth. We set up such a formation, on the one hand, because the teleportation system consumes a lot of energy, and gathering a large amount of dimensional power with the formation is enough to make up for it, and there is even a lot of surplus for all magicians to cultivate and consume. On the other hand, the gathering of a large number of dimensional forces, although it means that the rest of the Earth will be safer, but this means that it is more vulnerable to the prying eyes of the dimensional Mephisto. 35. So, if you're going to borrow our teleportation system, either find a suitable energy source or gather the power of dimensions like us and provide consumption. But at the same time, you must also be wary of the invasion of the dimension Mephisto. They are not good people. 99. Speaking of which, Ancient One's tone has become very serious. Now, do you still need it? 900. Lin heard what the Ancient One magician said, thought for a moment, stretched out his hand and waved. 3 rings appeared in front of him, and said to the Ancient One magician. Sorcerer Supreme, this is my gift, 3 rings, each containing 1,000 copies of the corresponding energy. Convergence of the power transmission system of dimensions, we want it. As for the invasion of Dimension Mephisto, speaking of at the moment, Lin's eyes flashed fiercely and he said proudly. Come on one, let's kill one. Come on a pair, we'll kill a pair. 95. Don't scare me, Lin. 35. After the Ancient One magician heard it, he nodded his head in admiration, and waved his hand away from the 3 rings floating in front of him. At the same time, a book list appeared in the air and said softly. In the future, we, Xingyao, will also be a force to resist the invasion of Dimension Mephisto. I am very supportive of energetic juniors like you. Hopefully there will be a chance to play alongside Kamar Taj's magician in the future. Lin said softly with a faint smile on her face when she heard it. You also take this book list and go to the library to read related materials. If there is anything you don't understand, you can talk to me directly. Okay, the gift is accepted. Thank you Sorcerer Supreme for the recognition. Chapter 147 Constructing the Extraordinary World of Earth? 3 days later, in Los Angeles, Lin's villa. Lin nodded very satisfied when she saw the record book of the Hand Removal Association organized by Vera. A few days ago, Frank and Xu Wenwu submitted to themselves a mission plan to encircle and suppress the peace meeting. At the same time, it is said that in order to ensure the smooth progress of the task and reduce unnecessary personnel losses, the reward was applied for in advance. He simply thought about it and agreed. After all, the resources they need to improve are really a drop in the bucket for him. Besides, they took a look at the mission plan they handed over to them and were quite satisfied. It can be said that the hands and the club have been cleaned up from the beginning to the end, and at the same time, their assets have been reasonably and legally annexed. Even for those who were injured, resettlement preparations were made in advance. The whole process is perfect, so Lin doesn't care about these little things. As for the final result, it was exactly as expected. Lin couldn't help but sigh that talent is extremely important to any power. There is no problem with recruiting Xu Wenwu to join Xingyao. Well, he decided that in order to make Xu Wenwu return to his heart, he would improve his family's ability and longevity. In order to keep Frank from falling behind, he also decided to help him and improve his strength more quickly. At least, not too far from Xu Wenwu. As soon as the thought changed, Lin's brain soon came up with a specific plan. Then, let Vera briefly record the plan. Just stop thinking too much and wait for them to rest for a few days before rewarding them. And he, now has his own task. That is, learn Kamar Taj's teleportation system. 3 days ago, Kama Taj's knowledge of the teleportation system and the Ancient One Magician's guidance opportunity were exchanged for a lot of money. In this regard, even for the price, Lin has to study hard. Not to mention, this transmission system will become the main artery for the future development of Xingyao. So, Lin has been researching, has been digging. Although there are a lot of books, they contain a lot of content. However, in view of his previous accumulation, most of the knowledge can be quickly understood, and there are some difficulties that can be asked about the Ancient One Magician. Advertisement as for the hidden dangers behind the transmission system. This is what the Ancient One Magician calls the Dimensional Mephisto invasion. Had to make Lin think twice. He is confident that as long as the Dimension Mephisto does not enter the Earth in person, even if it is just duplication, he can suppress it. But, he couldn't keep the tarot from coming out all the time. More importantly, even if he let his men go to resist the invasion, may bring losses for a week or two, not very strong. But after a long time, it seems like continuous bloodletting, which is bound to bring huge amounts of pressure to Xingyao. So, Lin is thinking about the invasion of Dimension Mephisto, whether to pull other forces to mine. After all, this is about the whole planet. He has the strength to suppress the top powerhouses, but he needs more people to defend against a large number of cannon fodder, and even say to kill. Could it be true, let your subordinates be cannon fodder? Thinking of this, Lin shook his head slightly. Impossible, he has not yet been so righteous and awe-inspiring. All I can say is, let Du Shield and even other organizations join this battlefield. Together against the Latitude invasion, but once it does, it means that the positioning of the tarot must be changed. Impossible, it is simply the headquarters of Xingyao in the future. It is a city that embraces all forces. Although there must be Xingyao to call the shots, under the mixed situation, it is bound to bring a lot of risks. Because, going on like this, the teleportation system built by Lin will no longer belong to Xingyao alone, but will belong to the entire Earth. Thinking of this, Lin looked a little weird. Such a scene reminded him of the urban novels in his previous life. Extraordinary Earth. It is impossible, he will travel to Marvel and will build an extraordinary world exclusive to the Earth. Advertisement let all the extraordinary people in the whole Earth form their own circle and form the rules of extraordinary people. Instead of the current situation, the superhumans are scattered everywhere, and they are even captured by forces like S.H.I.E.L.D. Only, once this happens, Xingyao will definitely be in the eyes of the congregation. After all, the leader of the supernatural world of the Earth, called Roar, is not simple. But, thinking of this thing called Roar, made Lin's heart even more excited. This kind of excitement can only be perceived when the previous life has just started a business, and when the system is opened in this life. At this moment, Lin's heart began to become extremely active, and in his brain, thoughts and inspiration kept flying. After a while, sudden, boom, Lin slapped the table heavily, and the palm in the desk made a loud sound. This can be done, or even must be done. Once done, that Xingyao could really become the #1 supernatural force on Earth. Thinking of this, Fang Shu immediately ordered Vera. Vera, contact Frank and Xu Wenwu, and the company's strategic planning department. Tell them, Nuo's good, collectively come to Xingyao building tomorrow morning. No, come to my villa. There is an extremely important thing that they need to analyze, plan, make recommendations. Okay, sir. Contacting. This meeting can be very long, let them arrange their own affairs in advance. Soon, I heard Vera's soft voice ringing in my ears. Well, one person is short-witted, and everyone is smart. This kind of thing related to future development must go through detailed argumentation, discussion, and negotiation before a final decision can be made. Although Lin has a lot of ideas in his mind, it really involves a city, and even the construction of a circle. It also takes the power of the crowd. By the way, tell them. Professional things are left to professional people to do. Chapter 148 Reconstructing Starlight, Rare Tea Leaves. The next day, morning, Lin's villa. In the living room of the villa, people in twos and threes gathered in a pile. Xu Wenwu and Frank sat on the sofa in the living room with a glass of water and chatted. Xu Wenwu looked around for a week, looking at these familiar and unfamiliar figures. Thoughts flashed in his eyes. Since joining Xingyao, he has known Xingyao's internal personnel situation. In addition to force, he basically knows a lot about some people who run the company. He has never met these people before, but in the information, the introduction is very detailed. Because, basically these people can influence the future development direction of Xingyao. All are strategically planned, providing various suggestions for their own boss's decision-making. If you are not wrong, my boss called me this time, and Frank and others came over. Should be. There is a future development direction of Xingyao that they need to improve. Thinking of this, Xu Wenwu looked at Frank in front of him and asked like a small talk. Frank, you have been with the boss the longest. Do you know what the boss called us this time? 99? After listening to Frank on the opposite side, he frowned slightly, took a sip of the water in his glass, and then slowly replied, as if he had been exploring this question at 903. Xu, the boss didn't mention it to me this time, but... Frank turned his head and glanced at the people around him and continued to speak to Xu Wenwu. I'm sure you also know the work of these people around you. Basically, it can be called the boss's think tank. This time, the think tank will be called with both of us. It can only show that the company will make great moves in the future. For a combat department like ours, there are probably not too many things involved, or even a lot. After Xu Wenwu heard it, he nodded. He had the same thought just now. However, he thought of a deeper layer. Recently, it seems that Xingyao has not changed much except for joining himself. And his wife Yingli had communicated with him before. It is clear that Lin has the intention of taking Taro as the star headquarters and is extremely firm. Not surprisingly, in the next month, Taro will be open again. Therefore, during this time period, Xu Wenwu could no longer think of it. Advertisement in addition to building headquarters, what exactly needs to be called to bring these people together? Because once the headquarters is built, it is bound to bring about great changes. If nothing else, the location of the headquarters and the positions of the branches will be vacant at once. It will definitely bring about earth-shaking changes. With these guesses, Xu Wenwu also calmed down and continued to chat with Frank. After all, he wasn't very familiar with people who did consulting, who did strategic planning. Chatted for a while. Sudden, Xu Wenwu and Frank both raised their heads and looked at a relatively young Chinese with a beautiful face standing in front of them, as if they had sensed something. Holding a pot of tea, this person asked with a smile at the two of them. Hello, my name is Fang Yuan. I saw that the water in the 2 cups is almost drinking. Need some tea? Xu Wenwu and Frank were stunned for a moment, and immediately thought about this person's information in their minds. Well, this person's name is Fang Yuan, and he is 29 years old. He is also a member of the think tank, but he is the youngest among them. And the ideas are very bold, occasionally producing unexpected but very practical ideas. My boss once praised this person once. Therefore, seeing the other party holding tea and showing goodwill, they all replied mildly. Okay, sorry to trouble you, Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan, after hearing the two's replies, very naturally refilled a cup of tea for the two of them, and said as if chatting. Two friends. I saw a lot of tea leaves and prepared tea in the boss's office before. And the quality is very good. I know that the boss also likes to drink tea. So, I specifically learned about these tea leaves. However, what surprised me was that when I saw it just now, the tea that the boss had stored was of the highest quality. ACFI, it's top-notch, and I've even just seen a kind of tea, although it's a small amount, it's extremely valuable. It's the Dehongpao, which is said to be worth 10 million yuan per caddy, the best of all teas, 99. It seems that the boss is quite interested in drinking tea. Hearing what Fang Yuan said, Xu Wenwu and Frank looked at each other with a hint of surprise in their eyes. They both knew that Lin had been interested in drinking tea since a year ago. Looking for someone to systematically learn how to drink tea and collect precious tea leaves. Even when communicating with Lin, sometimes if I encounter freshly brewed tea, I will drink a cup of tea brewed by Lin himself. Advertisement. It's just that he didn't expect that this person would be interested in Lin's hobby. Also specialized in the knowledge of tea. It seems that it is not luck that the other party is so young to reach this point. Seeing this, Xu Wenwu looked at the friendly face of the other party and said a little jokingly. Yes, it seems that the next time it's time to give the boss a gift, it's time to pick some cherished tea leaves, 99. Hearing this Fang Yuan, he smiled and replied, it's a good idea, I happen to have some sources of tea in my hometown, 35. If necessary, I can provide a contact information here, but he has a lot of treasured tea in his home. When Frank next to him heard it, he couldn't help laughing. Xu's idea, I agree. Just in time, I'm also worried about what gift to give next holiday. Then I'll trouble you this time. I'll contact there to see if there are any good tea leaves. After Fang Yuan heard it, his eyes lit up, he took out a card case from his pocket, and took out 2 business cards from it. They handed them to Frank and Xu Wenwu respectively, and said with a smile. This is the contact information of my friend, whose family specializes in making tea. There is a lot of research on this. As long as my name is mentioned, I will definitely serve more attentively. Afterwards, watching the two of them thank them, and then put away their business cards, they said tentatively. I have heard the prestige of the two in the group before. It is said that boss has a lot of trust in you, but he just doesn't know. This time, have you two received any news? What do we need to do? Looking at this posture, the movement is not small. Even, redivide the various departments of Xingyao. There will be huge amounts of changes in Starlight in the future. It is very likely that the headquarters of Xingyao will be rebuilt. Lin and Frank looked at each other with a smile in their eyes, knowing the other's purpose. Then Xu Wenwu smiled faintly, as if to mention a point. After speaking, he looked around and said with some emotion. However, it is certain. 35, Fang Yuan, the boss didn't inform me about anything. However, if the other party's previous good intentions were accepted, it naturally meant that he would have a few more chats with him, and a simple mention would be considered a good friend. Chapter 149 City of Stars, Mysterious Contract. At this moment, Fang Yuan's eyes flashed a shock when he heard Xu Wenwu's reply. This time, I saw the two rulers representing the power of Xingyao come here. Initially, I guessed that this time things would be unusual. So, take the opportunity to come to befriend or explore some information. I didn't expect to hear such a big news. Restructuring the headquarters does not mean that the company will further reduce resources in Los Angeles, revealed. At the same time, once the new headquarters is built, it means that there will be a lot of job changes. Some rise, some fall, and some may be flat, but in these changes, opportunities and risks coexist. With his position, he knew that the Xingyao Group was not an ordinary capital force. Rather, it is an existence that truly possesses extraordinary power. For example, the two in front of him are said to be representatives of Xingyao's top martial arts, and both possess extremely strong extraordinary power. He is extremely interested in this aspect, otherwise he would not risk being targeted and make good friends. At the same time, Frank also looked at Xu Wenwu in surprise. Although he knew that something big would happen, he didn't expect Xu Wenwu to know it so concretely. Seeing this, Xu Wenwu smiled lightly and continued without explaining. This time, the location of headquarters will be very special. It's inconvenient to say where exactly, boss will talk later. However, just being able to join headquarters is going to be a huge amount of change. Well, according to Xu Wenwu's conjecture, if Taro is located in the headquarters, then Xingyao will completely break away from the status of ordinary forces, but step into the ranks of extraordinary forces. Something like Kamar Taj exists. By that time, Shining Star may still be retained, or even develop more rapidly. But the center of gravity is definitely on the transcendent. That's the big difference between headquarters in Los Angeles and being in a secret space. And the reason why he said it, on the one hand, is to prepare the two of them psychologically, and on the other hand, it is also to show goodwill. His own 10-ring gang, although he is powerful, involves very few extraordinary existences. The fundamental reason is that there is no complete transcendent system. Advertisement. Although he is powerful, he has obtained it all by relying on the 10 rings in his hand and accumulated over a long period of time. As for Xingyao, as far as he has known since joining this time, there is an immature, but very complete extraordinary system. Physical quality, spirit, and the path to improve the extraordinary ability are all complete. Even, according to his previous understanding, Lin has a close relationship with Kamar Taj. And Kamar Taj is a powerful supernatural force, and most of the people in it are basically magicians. Possibly the key to this transformation. At the moment, what was in Xu Wenwu's mind, Lin didn't even know. If Lin found out, she would definitely be very surprised and looked at Xu Wenwu. Because Xu Wenwu's speculation, although limited by the lack of information, many speculations are wrong. However, the key points are correct. Afterwards, the three of them continued chatting and waiting, and their boss came down to hold the meeting. At this moment, Lin, in the study, put down the mysticism book in his hand. The reason why he hasn't come down yet. On the one hand, because today's meeting may take a long time, so one step ahead to complete the day's learning tasks. On the other hand, this is a time for these people to think and discuss. Let them familiarize themselves with each other again, use their brains, activate their brains, and prepare for the next meeting. Well, definitely not the rise of bad taste, watching the state of their private communication. However, he has already read it, the last book for today. So, now, it's time to formally discuss Star City construction plan. Step, 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 almost everyone heard footsteps coming from the stairs upstairs. After hearing the voice, everyone looked up at the figure that was about to come out. Soon, Lin's figure appeared in front of them, but everyone shouted. Boss, good. Hearing a lot of voices ringing from his ears, Lin pressed his hand gently, and the scene suddenly quieted down. Advertisement soon, he walked in front of everyone and said aloud to everyone. 0. Ask for flowers. I know that many people are full of doubts about this meeting. Why not in the company, but in my villa? The reason is actually quite simple, 99. Because what we are talking about today is directly related to the future direction of Xingyao's development. Or, the turning point of the rise of Xingyao. After speaking, Lin looked at the look of anticipation in everyone's eyes, smiled lightly, and said softly. Space extension. Everything comes to life, spatial displacement, 9. In an instant, everyone suddenly discovered that the hall where they were originally began to expand. Soon, the entire hall space was enlarged 10 times before it stopped. Point 0. Immediately afterwards, they saw with their own eyes, a slender black wooden table and a large number of brown chairs suddenly appeared not far away. What was even more surprising was that, almost before they could react, they found that they were already sitting on the chair, with their hands on the black wooden table, sitting upright. This can't help but make them feel very shocked, you know, they didn't even move. While Xu Wenwu and Frank, who were sitting at the front, were expressionless, the horror in their eyes kept flashing. They know that their boss's strength is very strong, but making them move without resistance or even unconsciously makes them feel shocked and even terrified. With such strength, it would be easy to obliterate them. Lin looked at the shocked and horrified expressions on everyone's faces and smiled with satisfaction. Recently, I have specially borrowed a lot of space-related knowledge from Kamatage. After continuous learning, I found that my control over the space has been greatly enhanced. He believed that by virtue of his mastery of space, it would be no problem to go to Asgard to be a god of space now. However, he did not think further, looked at the crowd, and waved his hand lightly. In an instant, on the shady table, a piece of craft paper and a pen appeared in front of everyone. Seeing this, everyone gets their hands and starts reading. After seeing it, Lin nodded slightly and continued to speak loud while watching everyone reading. This is a contract, take a look at it. No problem, sign all of them. Chapter 150 The Core of Earth's Extraordinary World. These contracts were constructed by Lin learning Kamataj's esoteric knowledge, adding part of the memory of the previous life, and then uttering the law. The role is very simple, that is, it can monitor and affect people's consciousness and soul. When someone wants to leak the secret, is it an unconscious leak, the contract can directly erase the thought. If you are forced to reveal secrets, the contract will punish you, and the serious ones will directly smash the soul. After researching the contract, Lin was quite happy. The existence of the contract is enough to further improve the extraordinary world envisaged in Lin's mind. Because the contract is enough to make all extraordinary creatures, and even ordinary people, have the first trust and build the first order. Afterwards, after seeing everyone signing the contract, they looked at him with expectant eyes. Lin looked at everyone in the chair and said with a smile, I believe that everyone present here knows that Xingyao has super 910 power. After speaking, Lin started to open his hands, as if embracing everything, staring at everyone, saying word by word. It's extraordinary power. As for the level of our Xingyao's combat power, I can say that it can be counted in the world. Immediately afterwards, Lin pointed at Xu Wenwu and Frank who were sitting at the front, and said after a pause. Frank and Wenwu both have extremely strong extraordinary strength. They lead the Blackstone combat team and have been escorting the development of Xingyao. As for the other extraordinary forces in the entire Earth, they are all very scattered. And now, we will have the opportunity, led by Xingyao, to build a set of extraordinary worlds belonging to the Earth. And this is the purpose of calling you here. Having said that, Lin paused, waved his hand, and a document appeared in front of everyone. Looking at the bright eyes of everyone, Lin said word by word. This is Point 35, the City of Stars project. Looking at the shocked eyes of the middleman, Lin nodded very satisfied and continued to introduce. In the future, we will have a secret space dedicated to Xingyao. With this, I will build a large-scale teleportation system. In my conception, although this secret space is controlled by Xingyao, it will allow all the tops or forces on the Earth to enter. Specifically, 35, this secret realm will build a city. This city will be the core of the supernatural world of the future Earth. By doing so, we will influence the entire planetary supernatural world. Advertisement, and now, what you have to do, it is to understand the documents and information in your hands. Use your ingenuity to build a complete extraordinary city system. Let Xingyao obtain the greatest benefits and higher influence. Okay, my request is over. Now, start looking at the documents and thinking about it. Lin's voice just fell, and everyone looked at each other, their eyes full of surprise, shock and incredible. But in the end, it turned into excitement. They understand very well the meaning behind their boss's words. Once this plan is successful, Xingyao will really become a veritable giant on the whole Earth. And they, as the people of Xingyao, are very likely, no, absolutely capable of possessing extraordinary power. It made them impatient in their hearts, and even some people's legs began to tremble slightly, and they were very excited. It seems as if 100 million meters of gold are placed in front of them, and they are allowed to take it at will, until they can't take it. Great opportunity. God-given opportunity. Even Xu Wenwu was excited, as the former leader of the Ten Rings gang. He understood very well the meaning behind the success of this move. Originally, I just thought that the headquarters of Xingyao should be rebuilt in the center of business focus. He never imagined that Xingyao would have the ambition to affect the entire Earth's extraordinary world. More importantly, if there is no problem with the teleportation system that Lin said, plus his strong strength. If there is no accident, then, absolutely can do it. In this case, with his current status in Xingyao, the benefits that can be obtained in the future will be huge amounts of. Far more than the position of the Ten Ring gang leader. At this moment, his heart, which had been silent for hundreds of years, began to heat up. It seems like the moment when he first started to fight in the quartet hundreds of years ago. His sense of identity with Xingyao suddenly began to soar. So, he began to read the document in front of him with an excited impulse. The same goes for Frank across from him. Lin perceives everyone's excited emotions and impatient actions, and nodded slightly with great satisfaction. Then he sat in his chair and waited for others to read, while his brain began to think more deeply. Advertisement: the passage of time 0 minutes and seconds. Soon, the people who were originally excited began to calm down. At the same time, he kept writing and drawing with a pen in his hand, and his brows began to wrinkle, sometimes distressed, sometimes hesitation, and sometimes excited. It's like falling into deeper thinking, encountering a difficulty, getting an inspiration, or thinking of a new solution. At this moment, the huge space that was expanded by Lin's words, except for the sound of constantly turning pages and the nib of the pen colliding with the white paper, was completely lonely. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, half an hour. Soon, nearly 2 hours passed, and one after another, people raised their heads and began to communicate in a low voice with their colleagues next to them. After a short while, Lin saw everyone raise their heads, and the corners of their mouths twitched slightly. The right hand taps the entire tabletop lightly. Boom, boom, boom. There was a crisp sound, and immediately, everyone's attention was drawn to Lin. Seeing this, Lin said loudly, "Okay, now let's talk about your thoughts and problems." As soon as the words fell, everyone looked at each other and hesitated, not knowing who would speak first. But soon, a young Chinese man stood up, and Xu Wenwu saw that it was Fang Yuan. Seeing that he was holding the document in his hand, he said in a deep voice, "Boss, I just read the entire outline of the City of Stars. I personally don't feel that there are too many problems in general." 5.8. Immediately afterwards, the tone began to change. Some doubts, mixed with worry, said, "Boss, I saw that the plan mentioned to accept the forces of various countries to join the City of Shining Stars." Fang Yuan's voice just fell, and the others around him nodded, as if they still agreed with this suggestion. Otherwise, once they know the City of Shining Stars, the follow-up troubles will be endless. Especially the military headed by the United States, knowing that, they will not easily give up such huge interests. 5. Then we have to consider their impact. Fang Yuan, your suggestion. After Lin listened, he thought for a moment and said, I think we have to focus on that. If this is the case, the City of Stars has really been built successfully. So, I personally don't recommend accepting them into the City of Starlight, or even strictly preventing them from knowing. The 151st chapter is all transcendent, the moral commanding heights. Fang Yuan, I understand your suggestion. 39. I was born with the same thoughts as you. 55. As soon as it was mentioned, Lin's tone paused slightly and said loudly, I chose to accept them for 2 reasons. First, if the City of Shining Stars wants to truly develop, the power and resources of various countries are indispensable. But it can't be completely avoided. Even if we don't open to them at first, he will sneak in privately. The end result is about the same, so it's better to let them get in touch first. As for their threats, rest assured. In the near future, there will be a suitable time to show our strength, enough for our Xingyao to deter all forces. 35. Let them not dare to act easily and contribute to the construction of the City of Stars. Well, the timing is, of course, the Great War in New York. Now that we know that this time the alien invasion scale O2 will be even more grand, we must make good use of this opportunity. Showing strong strength and leaving enough deterrence, it has paved the way for the construction plan of the City of Stars and the supernatural world of the Earth. Although there may be twists and turns in the future, but relying on their own strength is enough to overcome all problems. His subordinates, Xu Wenwu and Frank, didn't eat dry rice. In particular, he has begun to tilt resources to cultivate extraordinary combat power and provide sufficient guarantees for the plan. After speaking, Lin looked around the crowd and continued. The second reason, I believe you should see the issue of dimensional invasion in the document. Although Xingyao alone can solve it, it will definitely cost a lot of casualties. Over time, Xingyao will not be able to bear it. The reason why I let the forces of various countries join it is that I want to use their force to resist some dimensional invasions. Minimize Xingyao's loss as much as possible. At the same time, it means that the City of Shining Stars is at the forefront of the dimensional invasion. With such a position, I believe that other forces will be more jealous of Xingyao. Don't dare to do it lightly. 35 Advertisement. Having said that, Lin said with a smile, we are really protecting the world. This move alone is enough to give us a position of righteousness. Stand on the highest point of morality, if they do it. Tisk tisk tisk. Hearing what Lin said, Fang Yuan nodded heavily and said with admiration. It's still Zhou Shang who was considered by the boss. 99. However, in this case, I have another suggestion. Hearing the admiration in Fang Yuan's tone, Lin nodded slightly, nodded and motioned Fang Yuan to continue. Boss, regarding the Order of the City of Shining Stars, I personally suggest that we must vigorously develop the contract system. I saw the relevant information about the contract mentioned in the document. And the one we signed just now, I found that the potential is really great. 35. In the beginning, everyone would have been skeptical about it. But as long as it can prove the authenticity and validity of the contract, it is almost equivalent to an automatic legal detection and order construction system. As long as the design is perfect, it is enough to show the influence of the City of Stars. So, my personal recommendation, from now on, Xingyao had better start spreading the contract effect. Also promote the use of contracts. Lay the foundation for the Order of the City of Stars behind in the Order of the Supernatural World. After all, the early days of new things are the easiest to mess up. If it is not stopped in time, the loss will be huge. At the same time, I suggest that it would be best to involve the legal department of the group as well. The formulation of legal provisions that meet the extraordinary characteristics is the foundation of the Order of the Future Extraordinary World. We want to quickly push the Extraordinary World Order formulated by Planet Yao through the contract. Expand your influence quickly and get the most benefit. It's like the Bretton Woods system that the United States implemented in the last century. As long as it really stands firm, our star's leadership will be difficult to overthrow. Advertisement. This matter, I suggest that the group must make great efforts to do it. That's my personal shallow opinion. Lin's eyes lit up when he heard this. This Fang Yuan's suggestion was quite good. Use the particularity of the contract to quickly promote the construction of the order and ensure the status of Xingyao. This idea is feasible, effective, and extremely profitable. Immediately, he said approvingly. Fang Yuan's suggestion is very good. Since that's the case, you can take the lead in this matter. 35. I will have people support you in all your work. Later, you can contact Xu Wenwu and the others, or the extraordinary ability. After all, speaking of which, Lin is still the people who work underneath, saying word by word. In the future, the senior managers of Xingyao cannot be ordinary people. Hearing what Lin said, everyone on the table was very excited, and Fang Yuan was even more excited. For extraordinary power, he can say it is a dream. This time, boss actually gave him this opportunity. As long as he works hard, he can really step into the peak. Lin looked at the excited crowd with a faint smile on her face. He let Fang Yuan lead the matter, and gave him extraordinary power, which is 1,000 pieces of gold to buy horse bones. Immediately, looking at the translator who sat down, he continued. Others, if you have any suggestions, go ahead and say it. As soon as Lin finished speaking, Xu Wenwu stood up immediately, his tone slightly urgent. Boss, based on the information I've seen before. Speaking of this, Xu Wenwu's tone has already shown some excitement, saying it word by word. However, I want to really manage a City of Stars that can lead the world. For the executives of the City of Stars, the managers have clear strength requirements. 5. Total transcendence. Therefore, my personal suggestion is to turn on. Because of an ordinary person, it is difficult to deter those powerful extraordinary people. I found that this plan requires a lot of manpower and material resources. According to my personal experience, even if you are strong. Chapter 152 Conquer the Tarot, Space Mystery, Totally Extraordinary. For Xu Wenwu's suggestion, Lin fell into deep thought. He also thought about tilting resources and cultivating a group of extraordinary combat power. Lay the foundation for the subsequent construction of the City of Stars. After all, managers are best when they have strength. However, the meaning of Xu Wenwu's mouth is definitely not to cultivate a group of extraordinary combat power. It is so simple. Lin was very clear. What Xu Wenwu means is to build it completely according to the extraordinary forces, just like Kamar Taj. Everyone is magician, not magician, who can only manage assets for Kamar Taj at the foot of the mountain. And Xingyao is the same. It's not impossible, because according to the results of Fang Shu's research, although we can't guarantee that everyone is strong, it is enough to enable everyone to unlock extraordinary abilities. Only, resource consumption will be a bit large. After all, even for Xingyao, it takes a lot of resources to train an extraordinary person. See you there. Top people like Kamar Taj with Sorcerer Supreme. The number of magicians can't be counted as small, but definitely not too many. If you really want to follow Xu Wenwu's statement, Fang Shu will definitely spend a lot of wealth. It will even directly affect the promotion of the Fifth Order language. That's what gives Lin some hesitation. However, Xu Wenwu was right about one thing. If the City of Stars really intends to lead the extraordinary world of the entire Earth, there must be what a top extraordinary force should look like. Otherwise, a group of ordinary people manage a group of extraordinary people. Even if there is Xingyao sitting behind them, they still cannot be deterred. Especially for the official forces of various countries, you let ordinary people deal with them. It is very likely that it is not Xingyao who deter them, but the people who deter Xingyao. And once you become an extraordinary person, your mentality will naturally rise to a higher level. There will be no problems with communication. Therefore, Lin thought for a moment and said softly to Xu Wenwu. A piece of advice on the transcendence of the whole. I personally agree with it. Advertisement, but given the limited resources. I can first take out a batch of resources to cultivate some extraordinary people, and then I will take out some resources to cultivate them every month. Although it will last for a long time, the goal of transcendence of the whole can be achieved in the end. Hearing what Lin said, Xu Wenwu nodded with satisfaction and said with joy. Okay, boss. 95, after I went back, I started to prepare, 99. Then, he sat back in his chair. Seeing this, Lin looked at the people below and said lightly. You guys, do you have any other suggestions? Everyone looked at each other, and soon, a white man stood up and asked with a doubtful tone. Boss, I have a doubt. After the successful construction of the City of Stars. How to communicate with other transcendents, 35, and what is the attitude towards those ordinary civilians? If they know about the City of Starlight and spread it, I'm afraid it will not be a small sensation. Standing up this white man, Lin has a good impression of him, and the suggestion he made before is also very pertinent. Think about it and say lightly. Rick, about your question. 99. Don't worry too much about communication, we must first have a channel to inform them of the existence of the City of Stars. After saying that, Lin glanced at Xu Wenwu. Xu Wenwu also sensed Lin's gaze, and nodded slightly to show his understanding. The Ten Rings Gang has been established for hundreds of years and has been involved in all aspects of the entire Dark World. Through their channels, it is enough to inform other extraordinary forces of the existence of the City of Starlight. Then, Lin said to Rick again, as for your concerns about civilians. Xing Yaohui holds an attitude of uncertainty, but also no denial. Someone knows, if you want to enter, naturally you can. If it causes a sensation, Xing Yao won't care, after all. Lin spoke to everyone word by word, with a confident tone. On this earth, Xing Yao has no enemies to fear, 35. Well, Kamar Taj is a friend, not an enemy. After Rick listened, he pondered and said. Advertisement, in this case, I personally still think that we should guide public opinion. 35. Try to keep the City of Stars a mysterious, positive image. To prevent someone from throwing black water. At the same time, we must also be alert to the existence of imitating the City of Stars in the future. If possible, I suggest that Xing Yao should set up a department. Specially attacking the existence of imitating the city of Xing Yao and maintaining the status of Xing Yao. After hearing Rick's suggestion, Lin didn't say much, nodded slightly and motioned to sit down. Seeing Lin's actions, Rick didn't say anything, just sat down. He knew the actions of his boss very well, and he undoubtedly felt hesitation for this suggestion, and might even reject it. It's happened before, it's normal. His job is to find problems and make suggestions. Whether it is suitable or not, whether it is accepted or not, that is the job of your own boss. All he has to do is do his job well. Immediately afterwards, he began to organize other thoughts, and the plan of the City of Stars was completely beyond his expectations. But he also knows that this is definitely a turning point and must be seized firmly. At the same time, Lin began to ask the following people to continue to provide their own suggestions and questions. As people in the meeting keep standing up and saying their own questions, their own suggestions, their own ideas. The atmosphere of the whole meeting gradually, warmed up. As the constantly communicating City of Stars plans are further refined, many details are gradually being filled in. Much to Lin's satisfaction. 3 days later, the Los Angeles villa. Lin was in her study, looking at the thick plan in her hand. Get the space secret, and the end result is very gratifying. A thick plan is the best proof. The meeting lasted for 3 days in total. Basically, except for those who slept and ate, all of them were discussed. The most important thing right now should be, however, these are secondary. Involuntarily nodded. In order to keep everyone inspired and energized, Lin even blesses everyone with her words. Conquer the Tarot, Chapter 153 Phoenix, Kiran, Nine-Tailed Fox. A month later, the edge of the bamboo forest outside the Tarot. On the edge of the bamboo forest, I saw two people, one black and one red, standing beside the leader Lin. It was Frank who looked in red, and Xu Wenwu in black. Behind Lin, there are a large number of combat team members wearing black battlesuits, as well as cars, weapons and so on. In front of Lin, it was Xu Wenwu's wife Yingli, who was holding the four-winged, six-legged, faceless Di Zhang, and said softly to Lin. Mr. Lin, it's not time yet, we need to wait a little longer before we can enter the Tarot. 35. Lin nodded and asked curiously, the Tarot is only opened once a year? 99. Yingli nodded and replied, not bad. I heard from you, you usually don't come out. 99. Although the Tarot is not small, but you people know the outside world, won't you get tired of staying there? Lin was curious about this. Hearing Lin's question, Yingli said softly. In the minds of Tarot people, this is the best paradise. It has everything we need to satisfy our spiritual and material lives. 39. Listening to this, Lin raised her eyebrows, looked at Yingli, and said jokingly. 9-10. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes, love can satisfy a person's spirit more. Hearing this, Yingli was a little speechless, but she didn't say much. Through Xu Wenwu, she also understands Lin's character, and prefers to joke or prank. If the strength is not strong, it may be beaten, but who made him stronger, he could only endure it. Immediately afterwards, Lin had some questions. I don't quite understand. I heard you say that your number is not more than 1,000 people. It's just a small village. it stands to reason that with sufficient resources, population reproduction should be the most important thing. But in fact, your performance in this regard seems to be detached. In this regard, Ying Li frowned and said nothing, perhaps she had no answer. Then, Lin continued. This may also be the reason why you can exist in Tarot for hundreds of years, even like a paradise. Advertisement: the more people there are, the more right and wrong. Classes will naturally form, there will be oppression, and ambition will gradually expand. 39. In the end, there is a great possibility that you will walk out of the Tarot and bring disaster on the contrary. ACFI, hearing this, Ying Li was silent, as if agreeing with what Lin said. At the moment, Frank suddenly looked forward and said, "Boss, there is a situation." Lin looked up and saw that the dense bamboo forest that seemed to be boundless suddenly had no wind and automatically, and the rustling leaves began to rustle gradually. Ying Li said lightly, "Here we go." Lin nodded when he heard it, and Frank shouted immediately, "Ready to enter." The voice fell, everyone boarded the car, started the car, and quickly entered the bamboo forest along the established route. The entire bamboo forest is like a maze, constantly opening and closing. Ying Li kept talking about the direction by the side, and the driver kept adjusting the direction. Soon, everyone passed through the bamboo forest and came to the bottom of a waterfall. And the maze-like passage in the bamboo forest quickly closed. Suddenly, a broken voice sounded, "Sir, the signal, weak, interrupted." It was Vera's sound, but it disappeared completely within a few seconds. Seeing this, Lin was slightly surprised, but didn't say much. He looked up and saw that the sky was completely different from the original. Suddenly, it became clear that he had entered a new space, and the signal would naturally be interrupted. You can enter the Tarot through the water curtain in front. Ying Li pointed at the waterfall with a complicated expression and said with some nostalgia. Immediately after, repeating the general, he said to Lin, his tone somewhat earnest. "When you see someone, please let me talk first." In this regard, Lin said lightly, "I personally hope that, as long as the other party doesn't do anything, peace talks will naturally be the main thing. After all, it's not good to make a killing." After saying that, Lin took the lead directly through the water curtain. Advertisement soon, the darkness in front of Lien was suddenly replaced by light, and the vision suddenly opened up. The grass is overgrown and the trees are lush, like a picture of lush greenery on the ground. The towering mountains outline a variety of lines, showing the magic of nature. In addition to the vibrant vegetation and strange terrain, the most striking are all kinds of strange creatures. Di Zhang, who was in Ying Li's arms, wanted to break free immediately. He vibrated the four wings on his back, wobbled and flew to those larger places, and in a blink of an eye, they played together, as if returning home and seeing friends. There was a long bird singing in the sky. Looking up, I saw a group of flamingos waving their huge wings and dragging their long tail feathers behind them. The whole body was bathed in golden flames, like the legendary phoenix. Seeing this, Lin looked at it with interest, her eyes full of inquiry, and said lightly, "Space displacement. Solid. 99." In an instant, a phoenix appeared in front of Lin without moving. So, reaching out and touching, the golden flame on the other's body passed straight through the palm, and Lin stroked its slender neck and wings. Shaking his head slightly, "The flame has no temperature at all, and there is no harm. It can't be fake anymore. It's a world apart from the real beast phoenix." Afterwards, it was released, and then stepped forward. A snow-white fox with a full 9 tails stood on a huge stone not far away. It has an elegant figure, and there is a little white fox with only one tail standing next to it. Lin had a slight perception and shook his head slightly. The creatures are real, but without any power, even an ordinary warrior can't beat them. Going forward, there was another 4-legged beast with a head like a unicorn pacing around, and some creatures that looked like scorpions. At this moment, a group of people walked out of the house, most of them holding long sticks or bows and arrows, standing around a human wall in the direction of Hong Fei and others, and all of them frowned and looked bad. "Look this way, look there, and even touch it with your hands." Yingnan. Seeing this, Ying Li, who was in the lead, stepped forward and said loudly to a woman who was in the lead. "But it just looks alike, without any power or energy." Unlike Lin, some members of the special operations team behind him seemed to be shocked by the scenery in front of them, and they generally behaved like Grandma Lu who entered and exited the Grand View Garden. There are layers of terraced fields on the mountains in the distance, pedestrians working on the mountain roads, and the lakes below the mountains sparkle with silver light. There are many antique houses around the lake, including thatched huts, earth huts and stone huts. In the middle of all kinds of houses, there is a slightly abrupt white stone railing casted steps leading to the only palace here. A group of people walked through the meadow where all kinds of strange life gathered, and the scenery changed again. Chapter 154 Dimensional Invasion, Soul Eater, Yingnan. Before Ying Li finished speaking, Yingnan took the initiative to speak. "Ying Li, you shouldn't come back, let alone come to Tarot with such an outsider." Hearing what Yingnan said, Ying Li's eyes dropped, and Xu Wenwu immediately frowned. But Ying Li still spoke slowly. "I want to talk to you." "This is," an old man standing next to Yingnan said in a sonorous tone. "Nothing to talk about, take them away quickly. You know the rules of the Tarot, you are not welcome, any outsiders are welcome to enter." Seemingly feeling the unfriendly tone in the old man's tone, Xu Wenwu immediately wanted to take a step forward. However, Yingli hurriedly held his arm and said to the old man, "Guangbo, you have to believe me, I have no ill will towards Taro." After hearing this, Guangbo shook his head, sighed, and said, "Yingli, you have left Taro and lost the power bestowed by Asgardian. Now, you are also an outsider, according to the rules, you should not enter the Taro." Hearing this, Yin Li's eyes rose with sadness. Hearing what Guangbo said, Xu Wenwu turned his head to look at Lin with a question in his eyes. Seeing this, Lin nodded directly, he had anticipated such a situation. In an environment like Taro that has been closed for hundreds of years, the forces born must be extremely xenophobic. For them, the rules are bigger than the sky, and it is almost impossible to persuade them with just one mouth. Only by playing a game and speaking with strength can we enter the stage of persuasion. And Xu Wenwu's shot may also be Yingli's idea before. This is his husband, so he will know the severity when he starts. If it is a Blackstone security personnel, then it may be harder to attack, although it will not hurt life, but serious injury is inevitable. None of this matters to Lin, though. Advertisement. As long as you show strong strength, even if the opponent resists, it doesn't matter. With his ability, a single thought can obliterate these people. What's more, these people have nothing to do with him. The only thing involved is Yingli and Xu Wenwu. In other words, if it wasn't for the sake of Xu Wenwu's wife and Yingli, he could have driven away all these people, or even wiped them out. With Lin's affirmation, Xu Wenwu stepped forward directly. He didn't like the attitude of these people to his wife just now. For Yingli's sake, although she wouldn't be beaten to death directly, she had to be beaten no matter what. Then, Lin gave Frank a look to pull Yingli back. Seeing this, Xu Wenwu released his heart, then shook his hands, and the 10 rings suddenly burst into a strong blue light. In an instant, he let out his hand, accompanied by a violent trembling bell, and went straight to the sky. Seeing Xu Wenwu's move, the faces of the Taro people across from him were serious. When they waved their long sticks, the bows and arrows were drawn, and a dazzling red light began to appear on the weapons, and they were ready to fight. Suddenly, Xu Wenwu slammed his arm down, and the 10 rings above the sky immediately rushed into the ground like a meteorite. Facing the sudden and intense pressure, everyone in the Taro group raised their heads to the sky, shouting loudly. Their long sticks shot up into the sky, and their feathered arrows shot into the sky. The weapons in their hands glowed red, and a large number of rays of light were quickly connected in the group battle, and it seemed as if a big net was derived in the blink of an eye. And the 10 rings of blue light are scattered, and as Xu Wenwu presses down his arms, the power is gradually exerted. The 10 blue light rings collided with the red giant net, producing huge amounts of energy fluctuations. Suddenly, the two fell into a stalemate, vaguely, and it could be seen that Xu Wenwu had the upper hand. One person fights a group, and the battle is evenly matched, which shows Xu Wenwu's strength. At the same time, Frank next to him spoke to Lin. "Would you like to come together?" Hearing what Frank said, Lin shook his head slightly, then squinted into the distance. Seeing this, Frank stepped back, and then followed Lin's gaze into the distance. "I saw that my eyes crossed the lake and fell on the mountain in the distance." There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, because in contrast to the lush greenery in other places, this mountain is not covered by any vegetation, and the rocks and soil are all black, making it very barren. Advertisement and Lin, with his far superior vision, could clearly see that there was a huge amount of portal in the middle of the mountainside. 0. ****. It was a gate composed of a large number of scales layer upon layer, and the red light that occasionally appeared on the surface was consistent with the weapons in the hands of the Taro people who fought against Xu Wenwu. If you guessed correctly, this should be the dragon scale. According to Lin's past life memory plus the occult knowledge learned from Kamatage in this life, Taro, that is, the secret realm of the main space of this earth, should have encountered the Latitude invasion a long time ago. The opponent should be that Soul Eater. And the white dragon at the bottom of the lake should be the resistor. And the Taro people should help the white dragon resist the invasion. The power of the Taro people is composed of the power given by the white dragon and the dragon scales. The dragon scale weapons that the dragon scales helped them build, and the power given to them allows them to fully play the role of the dragon scale weapons, just like the battle with Xu Wenwu now. The combination of the two is considered to be a good fighting force, helping the white dragon to repel the invasion and seal the Soul Eater. On the whole, the Taro people are basically attached to the existence of the white dragon. If there is no white dragon, the Taro would have perished long ago, and even invaded the earth through this. Definitely, with the presence of the Ancient One magician, they will die one by one, and a group will die. But no matter what, the Taro people can be regarded as protecting the earth. Although, it is for self-defense. So, Lin feels okay for these Taro people. But the feeling is the feeling, the reality is the reality, the plan is carefully prepared, and it is impossible to give up just because of a little feeling. Then, definitely, if you want to continue to stay in the Taro, that's okay. The City of Stars also lacks manpower, and their strength is not too weak. Well, let's talk about it after the specific negotiations. Call out. In an instant, he left the team, holding a bow and arrow, pulling the string and setting the arrow. The most is to convince them, pay money, and help them better integrate into the environment of the earth. Sharp tearing air sounds sounded, and a long red arrow shot towards Xu Wenwu. Among them, the leading woman was Yingnan. With her rich experience, she knew that if she dragged on, she would likely be defeated. At this moment, Xu Wenwu, who controlled the 10 rings, brought heavy pressure to the Taro people on the opposite side. Chapter 155 The Flames Burn the Sky. Xu Wenwu was expressionless when he saw the long arrow coming straight in. But immediately his arm was slightly retracted, and a ring quickly returned to him. Ding! The long arrow and the ring collided with each other, making a crisp sound and a yellow spark. The 10 rings also stayed firmly in the midair while the long arrow stuck to the ground. Seeing this, Yingnan was not discouraged, and then constantly pulled the strings and arrows, and the long red arrows rushed towards Xu Wenwu like shooting stars. And Xu Wenwu blocked all the arrows with only a ring in front of him. However, due to the removal of one ring, the pressure of the Taro people who originally resisted the 10th ring eased, and even began to counterattack. Afterwards, Guangbo led the crowd to counterattack, and Yingnan led some people to shoot with arrows. Vaguely, Xu Wenwu felt that he was a little weak, and then he stretched out his hand and waved, retracted the 10 rings, gathered them in front of him, slowly rotated, and emitted a dazzling blue light of 913. After resisting the attack of several arrows, Xu Wenwu waved his arms here. 10 rings rushed towards Yingnan instantly, and the strong energy fluctuation made Yingnan frown. Seeing this, Yingnan put away the success directly, and then put on a Tai Chi posture. A flexible force was born in the palm of his hand. After Xu Wenwu's perception, he frowned slightly. He knew that his original wife used this kind of power to influence and control his 10 rings, and even defeat him in the end. Then, immediately waved his hand and controlled the 10 rings to explode and disperse. 5 still charged towards Yingnan, and the other 5 charged towards the others in Taro. Seeing this, Yingnan kept waving his hands and following a strange trajectory, removing huge amounts of energy from the ring. At the same time, Guangbo and the others also began to prepare for defense, but they hadn't fully unfolded yet, and the ring was already approaching quickly. Bang! 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 In an instant, the ring knocked Guangbo and the others into the air and vomited blood and fell to the ground. Only Yingnan is still supporting. Seeing this, Xu Wenwu directly crossed his arms, and the remaining 5 rings rushed towards Yingnan from other directions. Boom! Unprepared, the ring directly knocked Yingnan to the ground. Looking at the Taro crowd lying on the ground, Xu Wenwu took 10 rings and stood proudly. Lin, who was standing not far away, nodded with satisfaction upon seeing this. Then, she said softly to Yingli, who was being controlled by Frank next to her. Now, go talk to them again. I believe the effect will be much better. When Yingli saw the scene in front of her, she glared at Xu Wenwu slightly, and then trotted all the way to help Yingnan up. He said softly to Yingnan with a very complicated tone. Advertisement, sorry, this is the best option. Yingnan asked with a slight frown when she heard what Yingli said. What's the meaning? Yingli glanced at Lin and said. They're very determined to want the Taro. Even if I don't lead the way, I can still find it. If I can't be the communication between the two sides, then the result will be even more dire. Yingnan followed Yingli's gaze to Lin, saw everyone behind him, and asked lightly. Is he the leader? The tone was puzzled, because Lin looked gentle, not very powerful. Hearing what Yingnan said, Yingli nodded heavily and said in a voice. Right. 55, he is the strongest, and even civil and military must obey him. Seeing a hint of surprise in Yingnan's eyes, he continued. Trust me, talk about it, that's the best solution. In terms of force, no one is his opponent alone. He can kill everyone with just one move. Hearing what Yingli said, Yingnan roared, took a breath, as if thinking of something, then nodded slowly and said. I can trust you, but you have to convince others. Yingli nodded, let go of Yingnan's arm and turned towards the others, and then began to persuade one by one. Watching Yingli running around, Frank asked Lin. Do you think she can make it? Lin put his eyes on Xu Wenwu, and then looked at Yingli, who was constantly running, and said lightly. In the current situation, it is basically impossible. But, at the mention, however, Lin continued with a playful tone. I can make her talk about success. Immediately, Frank and Xu Wenwu put their eyes on Lin at the same time, as if feeling the doubts in their eyes. Lin said lightly. Flame burns the sky. The moment the words fell, a large number of golden flames suddenly appeared in the sky above the Taro, and then gathered into groups of golden fireballs. Hanging high in the sky, it exudes hot, strong energy fluctuations. Advertisement. Everyone looked up at the sky with surprise. At the moment of Yingli, Lin's voice transmission suddenly sounded in her ear. I can only help so far. 35, the rest is up to you. Yingli saw a large number of fireballs floating above the sky, and perceived the energy fluctuations and deadly threats emanating from them. She swallowed slightly, and said in her heart that she knew. Then he turned to Guangbo in front of him and began to persuade him. Guangbo, if possible, I actually don't want to bring them here. But even without me leading the way, he can find it himself. You have also seen his strength. Just a thought can create such great power. Having said that, Yingli stretched out her hand and pointed to the fiery red sky, especially when it was suspended high in the sky, slowly spinning, emitting a scorching golden fireball, and continued. The reason I brought them here voluntarily was to minimize the harm. Now my husband is on board, so I have the opportunity to persuade them not to do it directly. Otherwise, the consequences are really unimaginable. When Guangbo heard what Yingli said, his mouth trembled slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but then he looked at the deadly and dangerous fireball emitting from the sky. Finally, he sighed deeply and remained silent. Seeing this, Yingli's eyes flashed with joy, knowing that Guangbo felt powerless, so she stopped fighting. So, I asked again, Guangbo, this is for the good of Luoda village. I don't want my uncles, aunts, and their deaths to be pointless. You know mine, if they are really evil forces, I'd rather die than 5.8 and I won't lead the way. So, Uncle Guang, you can trust me, and we can exchange for peace. Hearing what Yingli said, Guangbo sighed and said helplessly. Okay, you kid, do as you say. After hearing Guangbo's answer without rejection, a look of joy appeared on his face, and he immediately used Guangbo's attitude to advise other villagers. With the prestige of Guangbo in Luoda village, everyone quickly put down their weapons. Immediately afterwards, Yingli glanced at Lin. At this moment, Lin, who was paying attention to the actions of the villagers in Rhoda village, nodded with satisfaction and said softly. Disband. 35. As soon as the voice fell, a large number of golden fireballs above the sky began to slowly dissipate strong energy, and the fluctuations gradually subsided. Immediately afterwards, Lin looked at the injured people, thought for a moment, and said softly. Healing Light. 99 Chapter 156 Future Scene. Guard the White Dragon. Lin's voice fell. In an instant, all the people in Taro village suddenly found that a layer of milky white light appeared on their bodies, and there was a hint of surprise in their eyes. Immediately afterwards, he felt his body warm, and as a warm energy continued to swim in the body, many injuries quickly recovered. At this moment, Ying Li, seeing the good changes in the bodies of everyone around her, immediately turned her head to look at Lin, her eyes filled with gratitude. Soon, everyone felt that their injuries were slowly improving, and they had even returned to normal. They heard what Ying Li said in their ears. The look in Lin's eyes was full of complexity. In front of the enemy, he sent people to wound them, although their lives were not injured. But the anger in his heart remained unabated. Immediately afterwards, the red sky and the scorching fireball made them feel panic, even fear. Then, Ying Li persuaded them to choose silence. Finally, with the healing energy, recovering their injuries made everyone feel extremely complicated. Saying "Oh" is grateful, but it is not so profound when it comes to hatred. After all, people didn't die, and their injuries were healed. In addition, the opponent's strength was terrifying. Lin didn't notice the complex expressions of the Taro people. Instead, he walked directly in front of Guangbo, smiled and shook hands, and said softly. Hello, Uncle Guang, I'm Ying Li's friend. This time, on the one hand, I am for the Taro. On the other hand, it is also to save you. When Guangbo heard this, his face suddenly darkened. Beat them up like this, but also to save people. If it weren't for his weak strength, he would have to save people, well. But when he thought of the opponent's strength, he was immediately speechless, but his face was still bad, and he replied dissatisfiedly. Yes, that said, I would also like to thank you. The dissatisfaction, anger, and distrust in his tone, Lin could fully feel it, smiled and said softly. I know you don't believe it. We wouldn't have paid attention to you if someone from us had not predicted that there would be a disaster in the Taro in the future. After all. 35 Having said that, Lin turned his head to look around the entire Taro, and then said lightly. Advertisement, your Taro is still very secretive. When Guangbo heard what Lin said, his face was still full of distrust and vigilance. Lin could definitely see the wary expression on the other side, but didn't care. Immediately, he paced lightly, silently thinking in his heart. Scene reconstruction. In an instant, on the land where everyone was, the sky suddenly became dark. Everyone could see that a large number of creatures similar to bats flew wildly from afar, constantly impacting the phantoms of characters on the ground. I saw that their souls were constantly ingested by monsters. Guangbo and everyone could see with their own eyes that the phantom of the characters was what they looked like holding weapons. Then, from the distant lake, it can be clearly seen. A huge amount of bat-shaped creature, the Soul Eater, saw its claws tightly holding the head of a white dragon, constantly biting, and the white dragon was constantly twisting, but it seemed unable to struggle away. In the end, the transparent white dragon soul was continuously drawn out and entered the bat's mouth. The scene ended abruptly here. Guangbo and the others watched the scene where the villagers' souls were devoured and the white dragon was about to be killed by the Soul Eater. His face suddenly turned pale, his expression was full of fear, and he kept muttering to himself. The Eater of Souls. How could it be possible? How could it be possible? How can the guardian white dragon die? Lin heard Guangbo muttering to himself, expanded his voice, and said to everyone. The reason why I came to Taro. On the one hand, it is indeed because Taro is necessary for our Xingyao. On the other hand, it is also to save your Taro village and resist the crisis that will appear in the future. Immediately afterwards, he stretched out his hand and pointed to the monster in the sky above, and said lightly. This is the scene of the future. We have people who see the future, the final scene predicted. If you don't deal with it in advance, I am afraid that your Taro village will be connected to your guardian, and the white dragon will die without a place to be buried, and even affect the entire earth. So, no matter what you think, the space of Taro, Xingyao wants it. We need to get rid of Soul Eater, and you. Advertisement. Having said that, Lin glanced at Xu Wenwu and Yingli and continued. On Yingli's face, you won't suffer, you have two options. Article 1 is to leave the Taro, we will arrange your future life on Earth, help you to quickly integrate into the environment, and give you a lot of wealth, enough for you to live your life in peace. 5. Article 2, stay in Taro, we will develop and build in Taro in the future, as long as you don't disturb us, we will not interfere with your life. Definitely, if you want to join Xingyao, we will also match your treatment. Having said that, Lin glanced at Yingli and pointed to her. If you have any questions, then go to Yingli, she will be responsible for answering you. After speaking, Lin turned and walked away, returning to the crowd. In the air, there was still a scene where the Soul Eater devoured the soul of the White Dragon, and a large number of monsters fought fiercely with everyone. Repeatedly, as if telling them that if they do not agree to Xingyao's conditions, the future results will be even worse. Seeing this, Yingli's face suddenly turned pale, and then she increased her persuasion efforts. Lin looked at Yingli, who was walking around in 913, and nodded with satisfaction. Well, that's all he can do. If it weren't for the fact that the appearance of the other party was somewhat similar to the memory of the previous life, plus Xu Wenwu's face. If it was really a group of white people, they would have had an idea to expel them, suppress them, and even kill them. However, if Yingli still couldn't persuade him to offer the conditions, then don't blame him. Lin kept the middleman from Taro Village. It is indeed a complex of appearance and human factors. But more importantly, he was quite interested in the dragon-scale weapons used by everyone in Taro Village. You must know that Soul Eater's ordinary weapons cannot be damaged at all, and only dragon-scale weapons can be used to kill quickly. And Taro Village has existed for thousands of years, and there must be a lot of raw materials that can be preserved over a long period of time. As long as Lin obtains most of the dragon-scale materials and corresponding technologies through negotiation, it can be further optimized. Lay the groundwork for the subsequent suppression of the Eater of Souls. If he wants to obtain the entire Taro secret realm safely, there are two factors that must be paid attention to. The first one is the Soul Eater, this one must not be spared, and even all his clan must be wiped out. And another. Lin set her sights on the lake, or the depths of the lake. In his memory, there is one here. Chapter 157. 3000 Waterbound, Dragon Breath. Lin is quite curious about the guardian white dragon at the bottom of the lake. He vaguely remembered that this white dragon was very different from the Western Dragon Clan, not the Western Dragon Clan with the large lizard and wings. The appearance is similar to the Oriental Dragon, which is enough to arouse Lin's interest. With the memory of his previous life, he has a better impression of the Oriental Dragon. If Shenlong surrenders to him, then the city of Xingyao is equivalent to having a beast guarding the city, which is equivalent to adding a top combat power to Xingyao. Therefore, Lin looked at the people in Taro Village who were still not discussing, and said to Xu Wenwu. I'm going to chat with their guardian white dragon now. 35. As for the people in Taro Village, help me take a look, don't let them make trouble. If there is that kind of trouble, you should know what to do. Hearing what Lin said, Xu Wenwu nodded heavily. Seeing this, Lin spoke to Frank, untied the illusion in the sky, and walked alone towards the lake in the distance. Soon, Lin walked to the lake, looked at the lake and the sparkling water reflecting the blue sky and white clouds, with a look of admiration in his eyes, and then said lightly to the lake. Explore everything. In an instant, the entire lake was enveloped by a strange wave, and then it suddenly extended to the depths of the lake. Soon, the entire lake was scanned back and forth 5 times. Lin felt the lake information in his mind, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. Staring at a direction in the southeast of the lake, he said lightly, as if he could see the white dragon in the depths of the lake. 3000 Waterbound. As soon as the voice fell, the entire lake surface began to fluctuate, and in the depths of the lake, where ordinary people could not see it with the naked eye, a large number of rope-like currents appeared, extending to the bottom of the lake. Immediately afterwards, as if feeling the threat from above, the white dragon at the bottom of the lake suddenly opened his eyes, which were a pair of pale golden pupils. Seeing a large amount of rope-like water flow from above continuously spreading to his body, as if to tie himself up. So he twisted his body and swayed the dragon's tail constantly, and the whole lake immediately surging, as if someone was holding a stick and stirring quickly in the lake, and the mighty water flowed in circles from bottom to top. The large amount of water like ropes above are constantly broken. But then, a larger number of water like ropes began to appear, constantly colliding with the whirlpool, forming a deadlock situation. Advertisement. When the white dragon in the depths of the water saw this scene, a stern look flashed in his pale golden pupils, and then he quickly wandered up from below with his mouth open, and let out a roar. Roar. Lin, who was on the edge of the lake, narrowed his eyes when he saw the white dragon that flew out of the water and soared into the air. The slender dragon body meanders and swims toward the sky, with an extremely elegant posture, accompanied by a very excited and loud dragon roar. Hong Fei looked at its body, his eyes gradually fell on the dragon's head, and his eyebrows could not help but wrinkle slightly. Like Taro's, Phoenix, Huang, and Kirin, this dragon is really very similar to a dragon, and even the similarity is almost 100%. But just a little bit. The problems are all in the head. The first is the horn. The dragon's horn is shaped like a deer's antler, and should have a towering image, which is the representative of divinity. But the dragon horn that guards the white dragon is not sturdy, it looks like it has not fully grown, and its shape is withered, like a dry tree branch. Second, it has fins on its head. There are 3 fins on each side of the head, and even a chin. Finally, even ignoring the above 2 points, its head as a whole looks rather strange. To sum up, it is okay to say that it is a dragon, but it is definitely not pure, or it has not completely evolved. While the people in the Taro village were discussing, they saw that some people knelt down directly with the eyes of worship and continued to worship. Some people saw Lin and White Dragon facing each other not far away, as if thinking of something. They immediately started holding weapons, as if to rush to the edge of the lake to help White Dragon. At this moment, after Xu Wenwu saw their movements, he shook his hands, and the 10 rings formed a line in an instant, emitting a dazzling blue light. Blocked in front of everyone in Luoda village, Xu Wenwu also strode in front of everyone, his eyes full of sternness. At the same time, Ying Li also shouted, as if to appease the excited crowd. At this moment, the white dragon seemed to be a threat to the people below, constantly hovering in the sky, staring at Lin below, roaring. When Lin saw this, the corners of her mouth twitched slightly, she lightly stepped on the ground, and said lightly. Mirror space. 35 in an instant, the space of Lin and the surrounding area of the lake was like glass shattered instantly. Lin entered the mirror space with the guardian white dragon. Advertisement in the eyes of everyone in Taro village. The leader who guarded the white dragon and the enemy disappeared in an instant, and immediately became excited. At this moment, Lin, feeling the mirrored space of the replica Taro environment, and the white dragon vigilant at high altitude, turned his thoughts and shook his hand lightly. In an instant, the nearby flat ground began to bulge rapidly, and then a huge amount of palms went towards the white dragon claw. It is the earth and stone version of the dragon catcher. However, when the guardian white dragon saw this, its movements were not chaotic at all, it twisted its slender body suddenly, dodging the upcoming attack. Then he raised his head, revealing a golden light in an instant. In a matter of seconds, it directly stabilized its body, and the 4 dragon claws held a slight grip in the void, as if it had suddenly caught something. In the blink of an eye, it was lying in the void and confronted with the earth and stone version of the dragon capturing hand. But at the same time, the white dragon's tail was also rapidly stirring the animation circle, and the lake below immediately surged, forming a huge amount of water column that rushed towards Lin. Seeing this, Lin squinted and said softly, spatial displacement. In an instant, the water column had not yet reached Lin, as if it had passed through a space tunnel, it appeared directly on the other side of the lake, and then rushed towards the white dragon in the sky. Boom! The water column directly hit the white, Nuo Dahao, dragon fiercely, and then swayed the white dragon, and some scales fell into the lake. At the same time, the earth and stone version of the dragon capturing hand seemed to break through the block and grab the white dragon directly. Thunderbolt! Lin looked at the scene on the ground, then looked at the white dragon not far away, and said softly. Seeing this, Lin's thoughts turned, and the post appeared in midair in an instant. The dragon's breath collided with the ground, making a loud noise, and a large amount of dust rose into the air, covering all directions. Immediately afterwards, looking at Lin who was not far away, he opened his dragon mouth and roared loudly. At the same time, a white light suddenly appeared, exuding weak energy fluctuations. Boom! Space teleportation. Immediately after, a laser-like dragon's breath attack charged directly at Lin. Seeing this, the white dragon let out an angry roar, swung the dragon's tail directly, and struck the dragon catcher who was coming towards him, repeatedly slapped it, and smashed it abruptly. Chapter 158 knows everything. Suppress the white dragon. Thunderbolt. The voice fell, and in an instant, a large black cloud appeared in the sky, thunder roared, and dark black lightning continued to emerge in the dark cloud, exuding an aura of destruction. And there is a faint scene of space breaking nearby, and a black line flashes faintly. Seeing this, Lin shook his head slightly. The mirror space was relatively weak, and it was easily affected by powerful attacks and fluctuated. Soon, along with the crazy rolling of the dark clouds, a deep black thunder continued to bombard the guardian white dragon below. After the guardian white dragon saw the dark clouds above and the thunder that was rushing towards his face, he swam away quickly, his body kept dodging, flashing his sword, and roaring loudly at the same time. The dragon's breath that contained strong energy fluctuations continued to spew out of his mouth and rushed towards the dark clouds. Boom! 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 Roar! 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 Although the white dragon kept roaming and avoiding the thunder, there were still several black thunders slashing the dragon's body. I saw that the dragon's body was struck with a lot of scars by the thunder, and in addition to the large amount of coke, bright red flesh and blood appeared. The dragon's scales shattered continuously, and the white dragon let out huge amounts of mourning. Immediately afterwards, seeing his dragon breath, it seemed to be of no use to the dark clouds above. So he quickly focused his eyes on Lin who was not far away, but pain mixed with anger flashed in his golden pupils. He rushed straight towards Lin, opening his mouth wide open, as if to swallow Lin in one bite. When Lin saw this scene, the corners of her mouth twitched slightly, she muttered a word in her heart, and took a light step. In the blink of an eye, Lin teleported into the midair through space, and the white dragon at the moment saw Lin who had disappeared suddenly, and an incredible color flashed in his eyes. Then he quickly turned his head and looked around, as if to see where the enemy was. Then, seeing Lin on the other side in the distance, let out huge amounts of roar, full of anger. But he seemed to understand that he would never be able to catch Lin directly, so he circled in midair and quickly flew into the distance to avoid the thunder above the sky. Soon, with its fast speed, it was almost difficult for thunder to hurt the white dragon. Seeing this scene, Lin shook his head slightly and waved his palm slightly. Suddenly, the white dragon found that the sky was turned upside down, and the land on both sides of the entire world bulged high and closed, as if to trap it firmly. Seeing this, the 4 dragon claws of the white dragon quickly waved towards the earth and stone that was about to close, sending out light golden claw marks, smashing the slowly closing earth and stone. Boom! The earth and stone were shattered by the claw marks. Taking this opportunity, the white dragon flew out of the predicament, then turned to look at Lin not far away, and then looked at the strange environment around him. It seemed that he knew that he could not defeat the opponent at all in this space. Then, opening the dragon's mouth, a pale golden dragon ball emerged from the dragon's mouth, exuding strong energy fluctuations and huge amounts of coercion, and the surrounding space was slowly shrouded in golden light. As soon as it appeared, it caused waves in the surrounding space, and faint traces of black lines appeared. When Lin saw this, there was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Although this white dragon doesn't look like a purebred oriental dragon, it can definitely evolve into a real dragon with the passage of time because of the strong aura of the dragon in the Dragon Ball. More importantly, he felt that the breath of this Dragon Ball was very familiar, because it was very similar to the breath of the Keel that he had always treasured. Now Lin is very doubtful whether this Dragon Ball is actually the white dragon. In other words, did the other party evolve into a white dragon because of this Dragon Ball? ACFI, otherwise, the Tarot's large number of creatures that look like divine beasts have no power, and this white dragon alone has extremely strong power. He had to be deeply suspicious, but then, his face changed slightly. I saw that the energy fluctuations emitted by the Dragon Ball became stronger and stronger, and the surrounding space was shrouded in a faint golden light. Advertisement Lin could clearly feel that that part of the mirror space was about to shatter. In other words, the white dragon was about to return to the real Tarot environment. Seeing this, Lin shouted loudly, 10 times increase. Space is solid. The voice just fell, and a silver white light directly covered the area where the white dragon was. The space that was about to be shattered instantly solidified. Seeing this, the dragon's face was full of unwillingness, and he roared angrily at Lin. As if very angry, the other party interrupted his chance to escape. Seeing this, Lin smiled faintly and said softly, "The 5 sacred mountains." The voice fell, and 5 looming mountain peak reflections appeared in the sky. As the energy continues to gather, it becomes more and more solid. On the peaks, the ancient characters of Mount Tai, Mount Hua, Mount Song, Mount Heng and Mount Heng are recorded respectively. Immediately after, the 5 mountains began to rotate, and they became faster and faster, vaguely blending into one, shining a khaki light downward, forming a dark yellow barrier. The white dragon below seemed to feel the astonishing power of the 5 sacred mountains, and was swimming very uneasy, and even wanted to fly away from this place quickly. But it was firmly blocked by the dark yellow energy barrier. After hitting it a few times, it was found that the barrier was slightly shaken, but no cracks appeared. Immediately afterwards, the mountain above, which was made of a mixture of 5 mountains, suddenly covered the white dragon, suppressing it. Boom! The mountain directly suppressed the white dragon on the ground. Then, dense runes appeared above the mountain. The pale gold and khaki runes were intertwined, exuding a very mysterious atmosphere. The white dragon underneath constantly struggled and twisted, but still couldn't escape the seal of the 5 mountains, suppressed it, and could only utter a helpless roar. Especially looking at Lin, who came slowly, his eyes were full of anger and helplessness. Seeing this, Lin walked not far from the faucet and said softly, "Everything knows." In an instant, accompanied by a strange wave, a weak link was established between the white dragon and Lin. Immediately afterwards, a strange thought arose in Bai Long's heart. It seemed that the communication between one dragon and one person would be nowhere to be hindered. Then, Bai Long tentatively issued his own question. "Human, you." In the blink of an eye, he looked at the blue space power next to him, his eyes full of surprise. The power of space, in his memory, was considered extremely precious. Although the power of space here is not very helpful to him, if there is a lot of power of space, it can help him understand the ability of space. At that time, like this strange spatial latitude in front of him, it will be easier to shatter and escape. However, the other party made him surrender. Well, it's not that this condition cannot be negotiated. Let's go out and talk about it first. Let's talk again after you go out. Thinking of this, Bai Long's pale golden pupils flashed a sly light. So he nodded slightly and said loudly, "Okay, human, I promise you. But you have to let me out first." Hearing this, Lin Wei nodded slightly, stretched out his hand, and a scroll appeared in his hand. With a thought, he controlled it to float in front of the white dragon. "Advertisement then," he said lightly. "Just in case, it's better to sign a contract. So, I don't have to worry about anything going on." At the end, Lin's tone became visibly cold. When Bai Long saw the contract in front of him, he was immediately very dissatisfied. If he did this, wouldn't his abacus be lost? So he struggled, trying to escape the repression, and then fled. Seeing this, Lin showed a sure-looking look, so she thought about it and stretched out her hand to press it. The pressure of the 5 sacred mountains on the top of Bai Long's head was further strengthened, and Bai Nong could even feel the feeling that the dragon scales on his body began to faintly shatter. 0. Ask for flowers. At the same time, the dragon-slaying guillotine above the head also began to move down. Let the white dragon quickly feel the deadly threat. Then, stop struggling and look helplessly at the contract in front of you. Seeing this, Lin also controlled the suppression pressure and the falling speed of the dragon-slaying guillotine. After Bai Long carefully observed the contract in front of him, a look of surprise appeared in his eyes. I didn't read it carefully just now, but after reading it, I found that this condition is not unacceptable. I didn't expect anything as pets, servants, etc. On the contrary, although some of the conditions of this contract are stricter, the treatment is still acceptable. For example, once you sign a contract, you can get 10 copies of energy power and 10 copies of space power, and then you can get 1 per month. It seems that it is not unacceptable. The thoughts turned, and he looked at Lin not far away and the dragon guillotine falling slowly above, and closed his eyes helplessly. The thought turned, and the spiritual power came out, and quickly left a mark on the contract. Seeing this, Lin realized that the contract was established, and nodded slightly, so his thoughts turned, and he reached out and waved. In an instant, the seal of the 5 mountains and the dragon-slaying guillotine suddenly disappeared. Seeing this, the white dragon quickly jumped into the air, swimming in the sky, as if stretching his body. At the same time, Lin looked at the white dragon with scars everywhere on the surface of the dragon's body, and said lightly, "Sweet rains from the sky." 35 In an instant, a large number of light green raindrops appeared above the white dragon, dripping on the body of the white dragon. Immediately, it felt that many injuries in the body were quickly healed, and a large amount of wood-type energy was very comfortably nourishing its body, making a comfortable dragon roar. After a while, after feeling that the injury in his body was almost finished, Bai Long said loudly in midair, looking at Lin who was also floating not far away. "Human, can we go out now? Also, you can go out now, but help me to appease those people in Taro village later. If you guess correctly, they have always been attached to you, including your subordinates. Call me boss, or Lin." Seeing this, Lin waved his hand lightly and said something silently in his heart. "Okay, no problem, Lin, in the future, don't call me human." Suddenly, a huge amount of sparking teleportation tunnel appeared not far away, and the opposite was the scene of Taro village. In response, Lin smiled and nodded, and said lightly. Hearing this, Bai Long nodded and said loudly, Chapter 160 Dragon Scales, Conquer. Seeing the teleportation channel, the white dragon passed through very quickly, as if the mirror image space was terrifying. Lin saw this, smiled slightly, and stepped out. After entering the real world, Lin saw a place in the Tower Village, where several people were lying on the ground and suffered a lot of injuries. A look of surprise flashed in his eyes, but he didn't care immediately. It should be because he saw him fighting with the guardian white dragon, and wanted to come over to help, and even wanted to get rid of the current predicament. As a result, he was beaten by Xu Wenwu. That's right, don't expect Lin to help heal. Afterwards, looking at the guardian white dragon that was constantly walking above the sky, he spiritually probed upwards and communicated. Say a word to your followers. If you don't have time, you have to let me start. Also, you have a good rest. In a few days, I will take you to fight the Soul Eater. 35. After the white dragon in the sky heard Lin's voice transmission from 920, his roaming speed froze slightly, as if thinking of the contents of the contract, he roared loudly. In Lin's ear, it automatically translates into human language. Got it, Lin. Immediately afterwards, Bai Long's pale golden eyes suddenly emitted two golden lights, covering Guangbo and Yingnan not far away. Lin can clearly see the joy and surprise on the faces of the two with his far superior eyesight, and then, his face is ugly, and he immediately shows a helpless expression. If Lin guessed correctly, this should be White Dragon's way of communicating, passing some information. Well, it's practical, otherwise he'll have to get his hands dirty. Immediately afterwards, the golden light in the White Dragon's eyes dissipated, and it rushed directly into the depths of the lake and returned to its lair. Seeing this, Lin strode directly in front of the crowd, and said to Guangbo, who was leading the way. Okay, your guardian Bai Long was defeated by me, and now officially joins our Xingyao. I believe you should have received the news. Now, is there anything else you want to say? When Guangbo and Yingnan heard Lin's indifferent words, a hint of helplessness flashed in their eyes, and then they shook their heads slightly and said in a low voice. Master Asgardian has already explained it. In the future, everyone in Taro Village will only show you. Hearing this, Lin nodded with satisfaction and said lightly. Okay, the two policies have been told to you before, you can choose by yourself. Advertisement, just explain it to Yingli later. 39. Someone in Xingyao will be in charge of special arrangements. And now, show me the dragon scale raw materials and dragon scale technology that you have stored. At the end, Lin's eyes clearly revealed curiosity. Recently, he has been studying the aspect of weapon casting a lot, and he is a little curious about the way people in Taro Village build weapons. I don't know if there is any place to learn from one or two, it is best to let him improve his casting skills. Hearing what Lin said, The two looked at each other. Yingnan gestured and said softly, "Mr. Lin, please come with me." In this regard, Lin explained something to Xu Wenwu and Frank next to him, followed behind Yingnan, and at the same time, looked at the surrounding environment of Tower Village with interest. Well, it fits perfectly with his past life memories of the idyllic countryside. Beauty is beauty, but it is enough to appreciate one or two, and it is impossible to live for a long time. Soon, he entered a wooden house in the depths, and saw the neat dragon scales placed inside. A smile appeared on his face. Then, I heard Yingnan introduce in a soft voice, "Mr. Linen, this is the storage room for our dragon scales. Every year, Lord Asgardian will shed some of its scales, which we collect to preserve or forge weapons to defend against unknown enemies. This is the accumulation that we have accumulated over hundreds of years. You can take a look." Hearing what Yingnan said, Lin nodded slightly, walked over to the dragon scale, took out a piece to examine the lines inside, and said softly, "Explore everything." In an instant, a trace of silver light flashed on the surface of the dragon scale, and at the same time, a lot of information related to the dragon scale appeared in Lin's brain. Immediately, his eyes lit up. This dragon scale is a good thing. The energy conductivity is very high, and the firmness is not low. The most important thing is that it has its own dragon power property, which is a typical extraordinary material. It is most suitable for making some other effects such as defense or teleportation. Taking a look at the large number of dragon scales around him, a smile appeared on his face, which was a considerable amount of wealth. It seems that Bai Long has been subdued correctly, and the scales that he has shed in the future may still be a source of wealth. Immediately afterwards, an old man entered the wooden house, handed a book to Yingnan, glanced at Lin, and left. At the moment, Yingnan handed the book in his hand to Lin and said softly, "0. Advertisement, Mr. Lin. This is how we forge dragon-scale weapons, you can take a look." After Lin heard it, he directly reached out to take the book, and then roughly flipped through it, frowning slightly as he read. The casting method of Taro Village is really primitive, similar to casting iron, and basically there is nothing too valuable. The only thing that can catch the eye is its research on dragon-scale materials and the method to stimulate the attributes of dragon scales. However, for Lin, there is not much value in this, and it is an eye-opener at most. After all, the existence of runes can stimulate the attributes of dragon scales to the greatest extent. Afterwards, Lin said to Yingnan with a smile, "Okay, I probably understand this. You also have a good rest and talk about the future development direction. I will not bind you. You can choose to leave or stay in Taro Village according to your own wishes. Look at Yingli and Bailong's face, I won't treat you badly." Hearing what Lin said, Yingnan nodded slightly, expressionless. Lin didn't care about this, after all, he took the entire Taro, and he had conquered the white dragon they believed in. Don't you allow the other party to be unhappy? It doesn't matter, these people are not worth mentioning to Lin. On the contrary, keeping them is beneficial to Wen Bailong, Ying Li and even Xu Wen 5.8 Wu. Then, after a brief glance, I walked out of the wooden house and went to other places in the Taro to take a brief look. In the past 2 days, Lin dispatched the members of the special team and geographic research experts to sort out the Taro map, and at the same time to study where it is suitable to build the City of Stars. And the goal is precisely 2 days later, Yinyu Lake. After 2 days of admiring the beautiful scenery in the Taro, Lin lost interest. At this moment, he led Frank and Xu Wenwu to look into the distance on the edge of the lake. On the one hand, it is to enjoy the scenery and relax. Soul Eater sealed land. On the other hand, it can also be regarded as laying some foundations for the location of the City of Stars. Yinyu Lake is also the name given to the lake where the White Dragon is located by the people of Taro Village. Chapter 161 Holy Light Shines in the World, Soul Eater King. Lin looked at the surface of the lake in front of her, and with a slight look, she sent a message to the depths, and then suddenly retracted. Soon, the lake water began to sway slightly, and as time passed, the movement became larger and larger, and a whirlpool began to form in the middle of the lake. Sudden, a white dragon rose up from the center of the vortex, screaming in the sky, and almost everyone could hear the huge amounts of dragon roars. Looking up, Lin nodded slightly when she saw this scene. He said to Xu Wenwu and Frank next to him, "Frank, Wenwu, I have communicated with Bai Long, 99. At that time, I will be the first to unlock the Dark Seal. Our Soul Eater King. I will deal with you guys and wipe out all those ordinary Soul Eaters. You have to cooperate well." Frank nodded to Xu Wenwu, and upon seeing this, even jumped into the air and headed towards the barren black mountains in the distance. Soon, coming to the vicinity of Montenegro, Lin fell directly on the seal constructed by the dense dragon scales. There was a faint red light on the dragon scales, as light and rippling as the waves blown by the wind. Standing in front of the dragon scale seal, Lin was more deeply aware of the hugeness of the seal. He stretched out his palm to cover a piece of dragon scale, and a faint warm breath came from his palm, and the palm area was less than 1/3 of the dragon scale. From this, it can be speculated that the size of the owner of these dragon scales is bound to be larger than he imagined. At the same time, suddenly, a familiar and unfamiliar voice sounded in Lin's ear. "Lin, get me out, I can take you home." The voice is like a man and a woman, as if they have known each other for a long time, and it seems that it is the first time to hear it, and the content is also very strange. The idea of going home was hidden in the deepest part of his heart. Immediately, his eyes twitched and he meditated in his heart. The power of the mind. Suddenly, a force of mind covered the whole body and soul, and a brand new illusion was derived. The next moment, he heard the words in the seal. Tony, save me, my mother and I are locked up here. The thought turned, and then, the other party said again. Steve, save me, I want to have a last dance with you. Advertisement, Loki, let me out, from today onwards, you are the only king of Asgard. Wenwu, I'm in there, save me. As Lin constantly controls the changes in the power of the mind and simulates completely different personality characteristics, the other party's answers are also strange. After a while, the other party seemed to finally realize that he was being played, and the sound that was ringing in his ears suddenly stopped. Seeing this, Lin directly sent a sound transmission to the seal, and his tone was full of sarcasm. Speak, don't you like to talk? Why don't you talk? After a sneer, Lin suddenly heard a sharp scream, as if the eardrum was about to be torn or pierced in the next second. Seems to be in a hurry. It seems that this Soul Eater can't stand it either. I controlled the sound in my ears a little, and after a short while, the sharp screaming stopped abruptly. And Lin continued to explore the seal. At the same time, he also began to transmit sound inside, saying some provocative words. Soon, Lin saw that the dragon scale seal began to fluctuate, and then, the faint red light above the dragon scale seal began to shine more and more dazzling. As if blocking something. Tisk tisk, it seems that this Soul Eater King is quite angry. Immediately, he stepped back 2 meters away, looking at the huge amounts of seals in front of him. Lin said lightly. 10 times increase. Breaking cone. 99. As soon as the voice fell, thousands of dark purple cone-shaped objects appeared in front of Lin, and the tips of the vertebrae shone with dark purple light. As Lin's thoughts turned, more than 1,000 seal-breaking cones suddenly moved, covering the dragon scales and sealing every node. With the movement of the mind, it quickly rushed to the maple leaf, making a sharp wind whistling sound. Bang! 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 A large number of broken wind chases directly impacted the dragon scale seal, which directly caused the entire dragon scale seal to start making waves. Immediately afterwards, the dragon scale seal began to emit a dazzling red light, as if resisting something? But with the constant impact of a large number of seal-breaking cones, the red light began to slowly dim, and the speed of the dragon scale seal fluctuation was accelerating. The Soul Eater group inside seemed to know what was going on outside, and all kinds of sharp screams came one after another, as if countless monsters were waiting for the seal to be broken and they would start their killing spree. Under the internal and external attack, the red light disappeared faster and faster. Time passed by every second. Advertisement. As the energy fluctuations continue to intensify, Lin has been controlling the number of wind-breaking cones. Soon, cracks began to appear in the dragon scale seal, and the Soul Eater inside seemed to be madly attacking anything. The cracks keep getting bigger and bigger. Sudden. Boom. As soon as the sound of huge amounts of money sounded, the dragon scale seal was officially broken, and a large hole in the middle suddenly appeared. At the same time, a large number of ordinary Soul Eaters began to fly out of the big hole with bat-like wings, soaring into the distance, or choose to charge like Lin. Seeing this, Lin snorted coldly and said lightly. Holy light shines. In an instant, a dazzling golden light radiated from the entire mountainside of Montenegro, shrouded in a large number of Soul Eater groups that flew out. Hiss. 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 A large number of Soul Eaters constantly gnawed and wailed in pain, only to see the moment when Holy Light and Soul Eater collided with each other. As if 920 had been splashed with sulfuric acid, Soul Eater's body began to corrode or decompose gradually. Seeing this, Lin was satisfied and nodded. In his plan, he was the first line of defense. Although a small number of Soul Eaters still escaped, most of the Soul Eaters who had just come out of the seal were absolutely dead without a place to be buried, and at least suffered a serious injury. The latter should be handed over to Bai Long, Frank, and Xu Wenwu. They are the second line of defense. Enough to kill most of the Eater of Souls fleeing. Even if the second line of defense is breached, the last line of defense will be defended by the Taro Village and Blackstone security fighters. As fewer and fewer Soul Eaters emerged from the cover, Lin shrank the shroud of the Holy Light. Soul Eater King. Soon, a dull loud noise sounded. Lin also ended the shining of the Holy Light, and then proceeded solemnly, staring at the depths of the rather defective dragon scale seal. No matter what, in the end, none of these Soul Eaters could escape. As Lin's thoughts continued to turn, the holy light above the Black Mountain shone brighter and brighter, as if all the Soul Eaters would be wiped out before giving up. Boom. 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 If you guessed correctly, it should be. Soon, very few Soul Eaters came out of the seal. I don't know if all that could fly out had already flown out, or if it was perceived as a huge amount of risk to the outside world. Advertisement. Chapter 162. Space Fragmentation, Violent Kill. At the moment, Xu Wenwu and Frank, floating in the air, watching the dazzling golden light flashing not far away, and the roar of a large number of monsters. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, and sure enough, you saw a small number of monsters break through the dazzling holy light area in the distance, coming towards you like your own. The white dragon roared in the sky. The two of them couldn't help clenching the weapons in their hands, and their eyes were full of vigilance. Before setting off, Lin had already popularized the physical characteristics of the Eater of Souls and the real damage of dragon-scale weapons to them in advance. In Lin's introduction, there are a huge number of Soul Eaters in the seal, and more importantly, there is a very large Soul Eater king among them. All the little Eaters of Souls are equivalent to its slaves, and after absorbing their souls, they will feed back to the King of Souls without hesitation. And this is enough to confront the Guardian White Dragon head-on, and even faintly suppress the existence of the White Dragon. And Lin's plan. On the other hand, he first used a large-scale attack to reduce the huge group of Soul Eaters as much as possible. If there is a Soul Eater that breaks out, it will be solved by the two of them. That's enough to take out 99% of Eater of Souls. If there is still a breakthrough, let the fighters in the rear solve it by themselves. The plan is simple, but very effective, facing the mighty onslaught of Soul Eater. Xu Wenwu took the first shot. His face was cold, his thick eyebrows tightened, and after the 10 rings broke away from his arms, he danced wildly in front of him. And as the range of his movements increased, the 10 rings that kept ringing bells stirred in front of him to form a large blue barrier, and all the attacking Soul Eaters were blocked, and then he punched him again. Boom, to pieces. Frank next to him was not to be outdone. His energy was excited, and his body was covered with golden flames. As soon as he reached out, a Gatling and a large number of red bullets engraved with runes appeared in his hand. Holding Gatling directly, he started to shoot frantically like a rushing Soul Eater. Advertisement bang. 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 Once a large number of red bullets were sent out, they stimulated the inscribed runes, and a large number of sparks emerged, forming small hot fireballs. The bullet collided with the Soul Eater, and in an instant, the Soul Eater's body was torn to pieces. And the Guardian White Dragon above his head also performed very well. I saw him facing the swarm of Soul Eaters, and after a dragon roar, a large amount of golden dragon breath was spit out from the dragon's mouth. Wherever Soul Eater and dragon breath collide, they are immediately stained with a lot of golden flames. The ignited Soul Eater immediately made a shrill scream, and they fluttered their wings frantically toward the distance. But the golden flames that had already ignited did not give them a chance to survive by docking their tails. Helplessly, the Soul Eater was quickly burned by the dragon's breath during the flight, and only the black dust was blown away by the breeze in the process of falling, and then disappeared without a trace. After 2 people and 1 dragon shot, this part of the Soul Eater was basically intercepted. There were only 2 or 3 Soul Eaters left, rushing towards Taro Village. However, they didn't care. Their goal was still to escape the Soul Eater in the Holy Light area, and the rest of the escape group on the edge could be left to the people behind to solve it. In short, there are not many, so let's practice for them. And the villagers of Taro Village, looking at the 2 or 3 Soul Eaters scattered, all looked at each other, revealing a hint of inconceivable color. As they expected. This time, if the seal is broken, a large number of Soul Eaters will come, and even many people will be devoured to death. Therefore, the heart was originally very resistant. However, Lin's strength is too strong, coupled with the will to protect the White Dragon. Although he resisted, he did not act. But seeing this scene now, especially looking at the dazzling holy light in the distance, as well as the roar of the White Dragon, the alternation of fire and blue light. Immediately, a shocking color appeared in his eyes, and the resistance in his heart suddenly diminished a lot. Immediately, a few Taro Village villagers came out with bows and arrows, and the scattered Soul Eaters were suddenly eliminated in 1 round of shooting. Advertisement basically not blowing dust. At this moment, Lin did not know that the psychological state of the villagers in Taro Village had changed. His current target is the Soul Eater King who was about to appear. Boom. 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 A dull loud noise came from the inside of the mountain, and the thick smoke and dust shook. In an instant, the Soul Eaters who had broken through the seal and came to the outside world suddenly stopped their movements, turned their heads in unison, and shouted loudly at the Black Rock Mountains like a pilgrimage. Boom. Suddenly, the remaining dragon scale seals burst all of a sudden, and pieces of broken dragon scales shot out. At the same time, most of the mountain was easily shaken, and a large boulder peeled off from the outside of the mountain. Before it touched the ground, it was completely shattered by the huge figure suddenly knocked out of the mountain. In the next second, a figure with a height of nearly 100 meters was seen penetrating the dust of the gravel. Huge amounts of flesh wings stirred up a gust of wind, and a sharp roar immediately resounded through the heavens and the earth. Immediately after, more than 10 slender tails swayed through the space and rose to the sky with it. Compared with the Soul Eater just now, its size is dozens or even 100 times the size of the former. Its body looks a little shriveled, and its limbs with claws are slightly curled. What is even more bizarre is its head. There are 2 pairs of black horns on its head, a pair of extremely small eyes on both sides, and a huge and terrifying mouthpart occupies half of the head. At this moment, all the Soul Eaters looked at it and let out an excited cry, Zhao Dezhao. Immediately afterwards, the black eyes of the Soul Eater King instantly locked on Lin. Without the slightest hesitation, it immediately turned around and swooped down. Seeing this, Lin stretched out his hand and pushed, and said coldly. Backquote. The space is broken. Idle. In an instant, in the space of 1 person and 1 beast, a large number of ferocious space cracks suddenly appeared, revealing the aura of death, and destruction. The Soul Eater King instantly came into contact with a large number of space cracks, and then the body was constantly divided and swallowed, but it was special for the body, and the body was glued together again. And the damage he suffered caused the Soul Eater King to let out a howl of pain. Immediately afterward, he kept flapping his wings and rushing upwards, trying to get out of this dangerous area. When Lin saw this, his thoughts turned. He reached out and pressed down lightly and said lightly. Space Barrier. Chapter 163 House Dragon, Perish. Lin's voice fell, and suddenly, above the sky, a huge amount of silver-white space barrier appeared, blocking the escape of the Soul Eater King. Boom! The Soul Eater King collided with the space barrier, making a loud noise. Although the space barrier was shattered by the impact, it still did not completely collapse. Immediately, Lin floated in the air and said softly, Sword of Light. In an instant, a huge, golden-yellow giant sword made of holy light appeared in the sky, slashing directly at the Soul Eater King not far away. Seeing the huge lightsaber rushing towards his face, feeling the aura of holy light he hated, the Soul Eater King directly spit out a deep purple light ball, exuding an evil dark aura. Clash with the great sword of light. Boom! In an instant, one gold and one purple, the energy of two colors exploded. The Soul Eater King was directly knocked off a distance. And Lin, with a thought, a light blue shield quickly appeared on the surface, blocking and absorbing shockwave. Then, Lin said quickly, Exorcism Sword Chi, 99. Red flames burn the sky, Yin Yang Mill. 639 as 377 continued to spit out a large number of words in Lin's mouth, the energy between the whole world fluctuated violently. Soon, the sky appeared red, and a large number of fireballs gradually converged and moved slowly. At the same time, a large amount of dark blue sword energy emerged from the void, constantly charging towards the Soul Eater King. Affected by the sword energy of exorcism, it was clear that his body began to wear away. Immediately afterwards, the fireballs in the sky began to rush towards the Soul Eater King. And around the Soul Eater King, a large number of black and white grinding discs began to appear, constantly rotating at high speed, killing the broken body of the Soul Eater King, preventing it from re-healing. Advertisement soon, the sky appeared deep purple lightning, golden light and so on. Under the attack of a large number of different attributes of energy, all of a sudden, the entire battlefield is intertwined with colors such as black, white, blue, purple, gray, red, etc., which is dazzling. I only heard the loud roar of the Soul Eater King, and was bombarded with no power to fight back. After all the attacks disappeared, it could be clearly seen that the Soul Eater King had been seriously injured and immediately fell from the air, hitting the ground and rubbing for a good distance. Immediately afterwards, the leader of Soul Eater was on all fours, Acai, and wanted to stand up, but when Lin saw it, he stretched out his hand and pushed, and said lightly. Space fragmentation. This time, the Soul Eater King, who was seriously injured, could not block a large number of space cracks at all. Soon, Lin's body was fissured by a large number of space, split, consumed and eventually died. When the Soul Eater King died, everyone heard the screams of the Soul Eater group. Frank and the others took a closer look, and the huge amounts of shadows suddenly disappeared, and they knew that the king of these monsters might have been destroyed by their boss. Immediately, a trace of joy flashed across his face, speeding up the processing in his hands. Your own boss can end the battle, and you can do it yourself, and you can't lose too much. Including the White Dragon, as if not wanting to be compared by Lin, he directly opened the dragon's mouth and spit out a golden Dragon Ball, injecting a lot of energy. Suddenly, a golden red light flashed in the nearby area, and under the shroud of Soul Eater, it melted at an extremely fast speed and died. Soon, all the Eaters of Souls were wiped out. At the moment, Lin also came to them and saw them quickly ending the battle in their hands. A faint smile floated on his face, and then said gently. Go back, now we can deal with our secret space with peace of mind. Well, he has already decided that this space will no longer be called Taro. To be called Xingyao, in the name of Xingyao, to prove Lin's ownership of this space. As soon as the thought changed, he put the thought deep in his heart, and then took Frank and Xu Wenwu to fly towards Taro village. And the white dragon circled in the sky for a week, roaring loudly, protecting and conveying a certain message, then rushed directly into the lake and returned to his lair. At the moment, Lin, the meaning expressed by the white dragon just now appeared in his mind, and his mind didn't care. The other party just told Lin not to forget its share of resources in the future. Usually it is in the depths of the lake, whether you are looking for it for something or sending it resources, you can just come to the lake to find it. Advertisement. Well, it seems that he is still a house dragon. But it is also, they have lived for thousands of years, they should all get used to it. It's okay for Lin, just call it out if there is something, after all, the contract has been signed, so I'm not afraid of the white dragon running away. Soon the group came to the sky above Tulu village, looked at the shocked expressions on the faces of the villagers below, and nodded slightly. It seems that this battle left a deep impression on them. I believe that the other party will not have any obstacles in the subsequent recruitment and construction of the city, and even consciously catered to them. Afterwards, he landed on the ground and started a brief exchange with the crowd, telling them the final result, and after a few words, he left Taro village with the two geologists. Regarding some things about building the city, he still has to explain some things and make some other preparations. An hour later, Lin was quite satisfied, looking at the huge amounts of plain in front of him. This plain is huge enough to build a city that can accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. However, there are quite a few exotic beasts living on the plains, and one or two need to be driven out. Thinking of this, Lin waved his hand and said something silently in his heart. Expel the beasts. Soon, accompanied by a strange wave, a large number of alien beasts that resembled mythical creatures seemed to feel some kind of deadly threat and quickly ran into the distance. Seeing this, Lin nodded slightly, and after a large number of alien beasts left, he rose into the air. After taking a closer look, after determining the general area, he reached out and pressed lightly, and said lightly. As for the construction of the city, in an instant, in front of the huge plain, a slightly transparent semicircular defensive cover appeared, covering a huge amount of area. And this area, this is the approximate location where Lin builds the City of Stars. When the city was built, in order to reduce unnecessary interference, Lin specially set up space barriers in advance. Space barrier. At the same time, it is also preparing to solidify the space channel to facilitate the circulation of resources and work. City construction. Prevent some vulnerable pets or some construction workers from going out of the specified range without permission. Lin's brain emerged that the designer had given a drawing and said aloud. Chapter 164 Construction of the City of Stars. As soon as Lin's voice fell, the wealth value within the system began to decline rapidly. At the same time, Lin could clearly perceive that his mental power was rapidly depleting, and his face turned pale. Fortunately, when the mental power was consumed to a certain level, the consumption rate suddenly began to slow down. At the same time, the huge plain below was shrouded by the space barrier. There was a sudden loud noise. Boom! The original green ground suddenly began to crack, and a large number of khaki yellow pillars began to appear from various positions, and then continued to spread upward. Soon, the floating speed of the khaki cylinder stopped abruptly. Lin nodded slightly when he saw that a large number of khaki columns initially formed the frame of the city. Immediately afterwards, the ground cracked again, and this time, a large number of khaki walls began to spread around the column. Soon, the connection became one, and the thick walls around the city suddenly formed. Then, under the control of Lin's spiritual power, the khaki-colored walls rose inside the city, forming a street, an alley. After everything was over, Lin took a look at the total amount of spirit left in him, and couldn't help but smile bitterly. This time, the consumption was quite a lot. After all, a city that can accommodate almost 1 million or even tens of millions, its size is shocking enough. Even if it is just to build a foundation, build the overall framework. He didn't even build specific houses, landmarks and other buildings, and the consumption was huge. At present, there is not much remaining spiritual power left, and he can be said to be the weakest state now. If you can only control yourself and continue to float in the air, you will open up a space channel at most. If you want to play a powerful attack, it is basically impossible. Immediately, the spirit was lifted again. The construction of such a large-scale city, but he alone, no matter who sees this scene, will be shocked from the heart. It's a pity that he is the only one who is singing a one-man show in this scene. Immediately afterwards, Lin floated in the sky for a while, admiring his masterpiece while waiting for his mental strength to recover a little. After a while, Lin felt that her mental energy had partially recovered, so she nodded slightly, and the corners of her mouth twitched. Now, it's the next step. The construction of the city cannot rely on him alone. At most, he will finish the frame, and architects and construction workers will be required to settle in later. Guide the construction of houses, landmarks, tall buildings, etc. Advertisement. All this has been planned in detail within a month. At the same time, Lin has specially trained a lot of Earth-type power users in this month. The direction of their training is that of builders, who can quickly control the earth and stone to construct buildings according to the guidance of architects. Build a city of stars with the fastest speed. At present, if Lin remembers correctly, the New York battle is only 3 or 4 months away. In his plan, the New York War, Xingyao wanted to show his powerful combat power and establish a positive impression at the same time. It is better to make all countries feel a strong threat and deter them. Lay the foundation for the subsequent opening of the City of Stars. Although those big powers may still make small moves behind their backs, as long as they don't know how to attack the group, for Lin, they can go away with a wave of their hands. After all, his current combat power is the top in the entire Earth. After encountering the Mind Gem, you can obtain the power of the source of the mind, and then further advance to the 5th rank. At that time, even if it is the Ancient One magician, even if it cannot be beaten, it will be able to escape smoothly. This kind of combat power can also be regarded as stepping into the ranks of formidable forces in the entire universe. Thinking of this, Lin was even more excited. Immediately, he controlled his body, flew towards the center of the city, and landed on the largest square in the City of Stars. Then, Lin stretched out his hand, and a metal sphere emitting indigo blue light appeared in his hand. Then, Lin controlled the sphere to float upwards, while injecting a lot of energy, said lightly. Open the space transmission channel, curing. The voice just fell, and the metal sphere that was already floating above, exuding indigo blue light, suddenly began to shake slightly. Immediately afterwards, a blue light curtain was controlled by the metal ball and spread to the ground, and then the blue light curtain flickered slightly and became transparent. The opposite scene is the underground secret base of Xingyao. It can be seen to the naked eye that a large number of cargo boxes are stored in the opposite base, and 3 middle-aged men are standing in front of Guangwu, and a large number of black-clothed security combat team members on both sides are standing and maintaining a state of vigilance. Seeing this, Lin had a satisfied smile on his face. The metal ball just now was specially made by Lin this month, and its function is actually very simple. It is to open and solidify the transmission channel. Even if Lin is not present, the transmission channel can still be used without any consumption. Advertisement because consumption is supported by a portion of the source of space in the sphere, which is enough to last for a long time. In the later stage, a formation that absorbs the power of dimensions will be constructed to replace the power of the origin of space. Otherwise, even if he has more power in the space source, he can't stand the long-term consumption. After all, when the time comes, it will be a global superhuman, not just a base. Immediately afterwards, after the passage was fully opened, the leader of the opposite base quickly crossed the passage to Lin and said respectfully, "Boss, everyone and supplies are all here. As long as you give your order, we can start work." After Lin heard it, she pondered a little and said softly, "James, don't worry. This urban framework is just constructed by me. Everyone can come in first and get familiar with the general environment." 99. If there are any problems in the middle, quickly correct them and let them correct them. 35. It will officially start tomorrow. After James heard it, he nodded heavily and replied quickly. Then explained to the person behind. He is currently the person in charge of the construction of the entire city of Shining Stars. Specializes in this aspect of urban architecture. He has worked in this industry for 30 or 40 years and has a lot of experience. This time, when he heard the plan to build a city, he was extremely excited. This was an unprecedented large-scale project, and it was specially built for the superhuman. Once the construction is successful, it is enough to be etched in history. Therefore, he constantly applied to his boss to be in charge of this time. Lin saw his information, heard Vera's evaluation, felt that the conditions were suitable in all aspects, and directly held him responsible for it. At the same time, it also opened the spiritual power ability for him, so that he can quickly spread his spiritual power. Strengthen your control over some details, or supervise those who are lazy. Well, having the ability to give others powers is so arrogant. Afterwards, he gave a few more orders and explained some precautions, such as not running around, being careful with space barriers, etc. After the instructions, Lin returned to Taro Village. He still had some things to explain to everyone in Taro Village. Chapter 165 The Anxiety of S.H.I.E.L.D., the star of the Big Mac. New York, Trident Building, S.H.I.E.L.D. Headquarters. Phil Coulson agent holds a document and waits by the elevator door. Soon, the elevator on the 15th floor began to slide down and soon reached the 4th floor. Phil Coulson had just walked into the elevator with the documents and was at the moment when he saw Black Widow Natasha Romanoff in a black battlesuit walking in the same way. The two sides glanced at the familiar faces, froze for a moment, and then called each other roar. "Good morning, Phil Coulson. Good morning, Natasha Romanoff, 35. The two sides pressed the top button together, and then, both of them murmured. Phil Coulson asked first. "Natasha Romanoff, are you going to the director's office too?" Natasha nodded and replied with a smile. "Yes, there is a task to report to the director." Phil Coulson said the same with a smile when he heard it. Same, me too." Hearing this, Natasha Romanoff, A377, quipped curiously. "Don't say it, I'll take a guess. Is it related to Xingyao?" Phil Coulson nodded and asked with some doubts after hearing this. "Yeah, it's impossible, so is yours." Natasha Romanoff smiled, unsure, and continued. "There has been a lot of noise in the Shining Star Group recently. Buy a lot of construction materials and hire relevant designers. Then, many high-level executives disappeared. Tisk tisk, I really don't know what this Lin wants to do." After Phil Coulson heard it, he understood what Natasha Romanoff meant, which was also related to Starlight. This time, the director wants to invite the two of them to come over. I am afraid that the two sides will cooperate with each other again. So, he said with a smile, "Looks like Natasha Romanoff, this time we are probably going to work together again." Natasha Romanoff nodded after hearing this, and she had the same guess in her heart. "That's why I said this to Phil Coulson, everyone has a foreshadowing for each other." At the moment, the elevator door opened, and the office of Nick Fury, the director of the house, was not far away. The two looked at each other and knocked on the door together. Advertisement with a call to come in, the two entered the office together. Nick Fury, who was wearing a black trench coat, looked at the two people who came in, and after a few words, he went straight to the subject, and first said to Phil Coulson. "Phil Coulson, tell me what I asked you to investigate." "Okay, Chief." Phil Coulson nodded in reply, glanced at Natasha Romanoff next to him, and continued. "Director, let me investigate which of the people recruited by the Shining Star Group has disappeared this month. 5. I personally lead people to investigate. I found that most of them are designers, construction workers, and some senior executives of Shining Star Group. Especially in the strategic planning department, a lot of people simply disappeared. 35. At most, our people investigated that these people signed contracts in advance and paid enough cash. 35. Then entered an underground base in Xingyao and disappeared. It's been 35 days now and they haven't had any informational contact with their families. And according to the content of the contract, it shows that such a closed state is likely to last half a year or even a year. Where exactly did it go? What exactly did it do? We haven't looked into it yet. Saying that, Phil Coulson handed out the document in his hand, as if introducing. This is all the information about our mission, Director, you can take a look. After simply flipping through a few pages, he put it on the desk and said to Natasha Romanoff next to Phil Coulson. Natasha Romanoff, tell me about your mission. After Natasha Romanoff heard it, she nodded and said in a deep voice. Director, you asked me to investigate, what kind of materials did Xingyao Group buy? Is there anything special? And which power has been annexed recently? I infiltrated those material companies here to investigate. It was found that they are basically building materials, such as steel building materials, etc., and most of them are used to build buildings. However, the amount they asked for was very large, enough to build a small city. Point 99. According to our SHIELD intelligence. It is found that Shining Star Group has not recently purchased land or vigorously developed projects at home or abroad. There's no sign of doing anything, this is very weird. Also, about which force the Xingyao Group annexed? Having said that, Natasha Romanoff glanced at Phil Coulson next to him and continued. Advertisement. This point, the other party's hidden traces are very deep, the previous SHIELD intelligence system has no information about this family at all. 5. However, after my in-depth investigation, I found that the name of this faction is Ten Ring Gang. His leader Xu Wenwu has now officially joined the Shining Star Group and has become the manager of the force. As for the Ten Rings Gang, most of the previous operations were about the underground dark world. So, after the Shining Star Group annexed the Ten Rings Gang, its influence on the underground world became more and more profound. Vintagely became one of the tyrants. Speaking of which, Natasha Romanoff couldn't help but sigh. The current Xingyao Group, White and Black, are doing very well. The political world is now supporting the new president, and the business world has become the top capital. In terms of the military, his relationship with General Ross is getting better and better, and in the underground world, he is also a tyrant. It's a giant. 35. After Nick Fury listened to Natasha Romanoff's emotion, he was silent for a while and said lightly. It seems that our consultant is not weak. After hearing what Nick Fury said, the two nodded in the same way, their expressions a little heavy. If this task is for the director and the others to deal with Lin and the Shining Star Group, it can definitely be called an extremely difficult or even impossible task. Immediately afterwards, the two heard Nick Fury continue. Phil Coulson, Natasha, now give you two a task to complete together. Natasha Romanoff, you worked as Lin's assistant before, and you should have a good relationship with him. And Phil Coulson, you have dealt with Lin a lot before, and even helped him solve some trivial things, and you have a certain friendship. You two, go find Lin together. Let's just say, SHIELD has a lot of 0.8 resources in urban construction. With what we know about him, it is very likely that he will reveal some more of his plans. Hearing this, Natasha Romanoff and Phil Coulson let Roar breathe lightly. This mission is not what they imagined, it is just a tentative mission. The most important thing is that with the relationship between the two and Lin, other people in SHIELD may not communicate as well as the two of them. You can discuss the next step depending on the situation, and when you come back, let me know Lin's reaction. Do you need cooperation? After all, both of them have dealt with Lin, and the relationship is okay. And Lin is not particularly disgusting and repulsive for the two of them. The two looked at each other, said a word, and turned to leave the office. If we really need our SHIELD later. Seeing that the two agreed, Nick Fury waved and told them to leave the office and prepare for the task.